service never lost touch with the concerns of working people and always put his country first. A true friend of the Labour movement, his presidency will leave a legacy that extends far beyond America to freedom and security on this continent. Most of all, of course, in our steadfast resolve to stand by the people of Ukraine. He leaves the NATO alliance stronger than it's been for decades. And with permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to update the House on my recent discussions with leaders around the world, including at the NATO summit and the meeting of the European political community last week at Blenheim Palace, the biggest European summit in the UK since the war. Mr. Speaker, the House knows the significance of Blenheim Palace, the birthplace of Winston Churchill, the man who steered the march of European history towards democracy and the rule of law, a shared sacrifice for freedom, the blood bond of 1945. And, Mr. Speaker, at both of these summits, we reaffirmed our commitment to that bond of security and freedom, as I'm sure we do in this House today. NATO is the guarantor of those values, and it is more important than ever because, Mr. Speaker, today in Europe, innocent lives are once again being torn apart. 2 weeks ago today, an attack on a children's hospital in Kyiv. Children with cancer, the target of Russian brutality. And, Mr. Speaker, Russia's malign activity is not confined to Ukraine. In the Western Balkans, in Moldova, in Georgia, they are sowing instability. And let us not forget, they have targeted people in our streets, attempted to undermine our democracy. And so, Mr. Speaker, in the first days of this government, I have taken a message to our friends and allies of enduring and unwavering commitment to the NATO alliance, to Ukraine, to the collective security of our country, our continent, and our allies around the world. Mr. Speaker, that message was just as relevant at the EPC last week. And can I take this opportunity to thank the Leader of the Opposition who brought that event to our shores in the first place. Mr. Speaker, at these meetings, I took a practical view of how the UK can meet this moment, not driven by ideology, but by what is best for our country. That includes resetting our relationship with the EU, because on these benches, we believe that the UK and the EU, working together as sovereign partners, are a powerful force for good across our continent. That has been my message throughout the many conversations I've had with leaders in recent days. Because, Mr. Speaker, countries want to work with Britain. Of course they do. They welcome renewed British leadership on security, on illegal migration, on global challenges like climate change. Our voice belongs in the room, centre stage, fighting for the national interest. And, Mr. Speaker, my conversations have focused on issues where the British people want action. So I'd like to update the House on my discussions in 3 specific areas. First, European security. In Washington, I told NATO allies that the generational threat from Russia demands a generational response. And that's why my honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, will set out a clear path to spending 2.5% of our GDP on defence. It's also why I launched a strategic defence review, led by the former NATO Secretary-General Lord Robertson, to strengthen our armed forces and keep our nation safe. I also took the opportunity at the NATO summit to confirm that we will deliver £3 billion worth of military aid to Ukraine each year for as long as it takes. And together we confirmed Ukraine's irreversible path to full NATO membership. Because it is clear to me that NATO will be stronger with Ukraine as a member. something I reiterated to President Zelensky in person in Downing Street on Friday. Second, I want to turn to the Middle East, because, Mr. Speaker, that region is at the moment in grave danger and fragility. And so I've spoken to leaders in the region and allies around the world about our collective response. How can we deal with the malign influence of Iran, address their nuclear programme, manage the threat from the Houthis, ease tension on Israel's northern border, and work with all partners to uphold regional security? Fundamental to this, of course, is the conflict in Gaza. I've spoken to the leaders of Israel and the Palestinian Authority. I've been clear that I fully support Israel's right to security, the desperate need to see the hostages returned. And I've also been clear that the situation in Gaza is intolerable and that the world will not look away as innocent civilians, including women and children, continue to face death, disease and displacement. Mr. Speaker, it cannot go on. We need an immediate ceasefire. Hostages out, aid in, a huge scale-up of humanitarian assistance. That is the policy of this government, and an immediate ceasefire is the only way to achieve it. So we will do all we can in pursuit of these goals, which is why, as one of the first actions taken by this government, we have restarted British funding to the UN Relief and Works Agency to deliver that crucial humanitarian support. Mr. Speaker, we received the ICJ opinion on Friday and will consider it carefully before responding. But let me say that we've also always been opposed to the expansion of illegal settlements, and we call on all sides to recommit to stability, peace and normalisation, and the two-state solution. A recognised Palestinian state, the right of the Palestinian people, alongside a safe and secure Israel. Third, Mr. Speaker, I want to turn to illegal migration. This issue has now become a crisis, and to tackle it, we must reach out the hand to our European friends. We started that work at the EPC, agreeing new arrangements with Slovenia and Slovakia, deepening cooperation across Europe through our new Border Security Command, and increasing the UK presence at Europol in The Hague, to play our full part in the European Migrant Smuggling Centre. Mr. Speaker, the crisis we face is the fault of gangs, no question. But to stop illegal migration, we must also recognise the root causes: conflict, climate change, extreme poverty. So I've announced £84 million of new funding for projects across Africa and the Middle East, humanitarian and health support, skills training and access to education. Because the decisions people take to leave their homes cannot be separated from these wider issues. Mr. Speaker, we will work with our partners to stamp out this vile trade wherever it exists, focus on the hard yards of law enforcement with solutions that will actually deliver results. I've seen this in action, tackling counter-terrorism as Director of Public Prosecutions, and we can do the same on illegal migration. But let me be clear, there is no need to withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights. That is not consistent with the values of that blood bond, and so we won't withdraw, not now, not ever. Because, Mr. Speaker, the basic fact is the priorities of the British people do require us to work across borders with our partners, and a government of service at home requires a government of strength abroad. That is our role. It's always been our role. Britain belongs on the world stage, and I commend this statement to the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Rishi Sunak. Can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement and join him by praising President Biden for his long career of public service, both at home and abroad. Working together, we took our AUKUS partnership to the next level. We supported Israel after the terrible events of October the 7th, defended our countries from the Houthi threat, but also led global efforts to support Ukraine as it resisted Russia's assault. On a personal level, it was a pleasure to work with him to strengthen the partnership between our two countries, and I wish him well. Mr. Speaker, as the Prime Minister indicated, the world is increasingly uncertain, the most dangerous it's been since the end of the Cold War. Russia continues its illegal and brutal invasion of Ukraine. Iran continues with its regionally destabilising behaviour. Both Iran and North Korea are supplying Russian forces in Ukraine as we speak. And China is adopting a more aggressive stance in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. Together, this axis of authoritarian states are increasingly working together to undermine democracies and reshape the world order. And in these circumstances, our alliances take on ever greater importance. And so I commend the Prime Minister on his work with our closest allies at both the NATO summit in Washington and the European Political Community meeting here at Blenheim. Across this House, we built a strong consensus on foreign policy in the last Parliament, and this has stood our country in good stead in this transition. Our allies, particularly Ukraine, know that whilst our government has changed, Britain remains an active, involved and reliable partner. Now, I'm glad that the Prime Minister also shares our view of the value of the EPC community as a forum. I'm pleased and welcome the fact that he did use the summit to discuss illegal migration, because it is one of the most pressing problems facing our entire continent. And when it comes to illegal migration, we all face the same fundamental question: how to deal with people who come to our countries illegally whilst respecting our international obligations. Because, of course, it's not feasible or right to return Afghans to the Taliban, or Syrians to Assad, or Iranians to the Ayatollahs. But nor can our countries accommodate everyone who would like to leave Afghanistan, Syria or Iran and come here. So I was pleased to hear the Prime Minister say that he was a pragmatist and that he will look at what works when it comes to squaring this circle. And I would urge him in his conversations with other European leaders to keep the option of further third country migration partnerships on the table, as other countries have been discussing. Now, I know the Prime Minister is also interested in pursuing a security and defence cooperation pact with the European Union. And here I just urge him to be alert to the trade-offs involved in this, and I hope he can reassure the House that any closer cooperation with the EU will not adversely affect the technological and procurement aspects of our other alliances, such as AUKUS. Because, of course, we're a pillar of European security, as our leadership on Ukraine has shown, but we also have alliances and interests that extend beyond the European continent. To turn next to the NATO summit, it was good to see the alliance reaffirming its commitment to Ukraine, with the UK at the heart of that leadership. And I hope the Prime Minister will keep the House updated on how the new unit to coordinate our collective support to Ukraine will indeed lead to an increase in vital support. And I would urge the Prime Minister to continue stressing to our allies that now is the moment to increase, not pare down, our backing for Ukraine, just as the UK has continued to lead in. Now, in 75 years of its existence, NATO has established itself as the most successful defensive alliance in history. The best way to strengthen the alliance is for the non-American members of the alliance to do more, to show that we do not expect the Americans to bear every burden. And I welcome the Prime Minister's indication that the Chancellor will soon set out a clear path to investing 2.5% of GDP in our armed forces, I hope by 2030. Because this would both show the Americans that the other members of the alliance are serious about boosting our own capabilities, but also show President Putin and our adversaries that we are serious about defending our borders and our allies from any Russian or other aggression. The Prime Minister also spoke about the situation in the Middle East. And we all want to see progress towards a two-state solution, where Israelis and Palestinians can both live side by side in peace, prosperity and security. But as we make progress towards that goal, our friend and our ally Israel must have the right to defend itself against the threat that it is facing. A threat demonstrated by the drone strike on Tel Aviv at the end of last week by the Iranian-aligned Houthi rebels. So in conclusion, let me thank the Prime Minister for coming to the House today to update us. I can assure him that on these benches, we will work with him on these questions of foreign policy and national security. We will ask questions, we will probe, we will push for answers. That is our duty as the official opposition. But we will always act in the national interests and work constructively with him to ensure the security of our country.
Can I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his welcome comments in relation to President Biden? I'm sure will be well received, and what he said about the consensus on foreign policy in relation to NATO and the EPC. I do think that's important, and I'm glad that we managed to get that consensus over recent years, because we are in a more volatile world, and the world is looking in to see unity in the United Kingdom. That is particularly so in relation to Ukraine. And I have commended the role of the previous government in relation to Ukraine, do so again, and took the deliberate decision when I was Leader of the Opposition not to depart on Ukraine, because I took the view and continue to take the view that the only winner in that circumstances is Putin, who wants to see division. And I think that it's very important for Ukraine to see that continued unity across this House. We will, of course, work with others. And in relation to the particular point, the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, old habits die hard. The point that the Leader of the Opposition put me on security and cooperation with our EU allies, I do believe that's to our mutual benefit, but I can assure him and the House that that does not cut across or come at the cost of other alliances, and we're fully committed to AUKUS, something I was able to make clear in opposition, and I take this early opportunity to affirm in government, because again I think it's an area where there's important consistency across the House. And in relation to the conflict in Gaza, I think the more that we can be united in this House, the better. It is an issue of great complexity, but I do think that the approach that has been shown is the right approach, and we take it forward in that spirit. Thank you very much.
Liam Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate the Prime Minister on his flying start on the world stage, and for his determination to build not simply a rules-based order, but a rights-based order, rooted in what Churchill called the Great Charter and we call the European Convention on Human Rights. We want its freedoms and liberties to be enjoyed by the people of Ukraine, but that will take victory over Russia. That will need more than courage. It will need resources. So did the Prime Minister discuss with colleagues internationally the need not simply to freeze Russian assets, but to seize Russian assets and to put them to work in defeating once and for all the tyranny of President Putin?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that question. The centrality of the Ukraine issue, yes, of course, it requires resource, it requires more pressure in relation to sanctions, but it requires resolve. And one of the key issues coming out of the NATO Council in Washington was a real sense of, particularly in relation to Ukraine, a bigger NATO with more countries than have ever been at the Council before, a stronger NATO, but also a unity of resolve when it came to standing up to Russian aggression, particularly in Ukraine. And therefore, whether it's resources or sanctions, they were central to the agenda there. Thank you.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of the statement. Closer cooperation with our European neighbours is absolutely essential, whether it's Russia's illegal war against Ukraine or tackling the criminal gangs responsible for the small boats crisis, and I welcome the new government's change in approach on this. I also welcome, Mr. Speaker, the new government's support for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Clearly, we need to put an end to the humanitarian devastation there, get the hostages home, and open the door to a two-state solution. Upholding international law is also crucial, and to that end, I hope the government will respect the ruling of the ICJ last week when it considers it. Coming on to the NATO summit, 70 years on from the foundation of NATO, the alliance has never been more relevant, and we support the NATO summit pledge of long-term security assistance for Ukraine, as well as increased support now to ensure she can resist Russia's attacks and liberate her territory. I'm pleased that in this new Parliament, this House will continue to stand united behind the brave Ukrainians opposing Russia's illegal war, just as we've done together in recent years. But I hope that members of this House will not be complacent about the impact that the upcoming US elections could have on the security of not just the UK and our allies, but Ukraine too. We must hope that the leadership of President Biden continues with his successor, and I'd like to echo the Prime Minister's tribute to President Biden. But whatever happens in the US, part of the answer is for the UK and Europe to increase defence spending. The previous Conservative government has left a legacy of the smallest army since the age of Napoleon and played fast and loose with public money, making our shared ambition of 2.5% of GDP for defence spending a much more complicated route. And we look forward to the Chancellor Exchequer's plan. I hope that this government will start by reversing the planned cuts to the army of 10,000 troops. This is a vital first step. So will the Prime Minister reassure the House and the country that this will be a priority within the recently launched Strategic Defence Review? We also urge the government to move further and faster in taking steps to seize the frozen Russian assets, of which there are £20 billion worth on our shores and the same amount on the continent. I hope that he will recognise that we have an opportunity to lead within Europe on this vital issue. If the US cannot, Europe must.
Thank you very much. On the three issues, firstly, on the international court, we do respect the independence of the court and international law, and let me be very clear about that. I won't get tempted into questions about the US elections later this year. Safe to say that it will obviously be for the American people to decide who they want as their president, and as you would expect, we will work with whoever is the president after they've made their choice. On the question of troop numbers, I take the point about the low numbers of troops. That will be looked at in the Strategic Defence Review that we're carrying out into threats, capability and resources. Thank you.
Dr. Rupa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was incredibly pleasing to see the Prime Minister both at NATO and welcoming leaders from across our continent to Blenheim Palace in a historic moment for a reset with Europe after the disastrous legacy that the departing government left behind. Can I ask, did the subject of youth mobility for students and such like arise? And could his government look into repairing this for its soft power, cultural exchange and growth-boosting properties that have been so valued as we're now in a post-Erasmus era?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. Look, the reset with our European allies was well received, and there was clearly an appetite to work in a different and better way with the UK, and I think that will stand us in good stead as we go forward. We did have discussions about a closer relationship with our EU allies, but I made it very clear from the outset, as I have done in opposition, that does not mean rejoining the EU, that does not mean going back into the structures of the EU, and it does not mean freedom of movement. And I took the early opportunity to make that clear to our European allies so we can move forward progressively, but with the right framework in mind. Thank you.
Sir Julian Lewis.
May I congratulate the Prime Minister on his election victory, and particularly on the very strong commitment he gave at the beginning of his campaign to the maintenance of the strategic Trident nuclear deterrent in the future. Does he agree with me that if an organisation like NATO had existed in 1914 or in 1939, which committed America to the protection from day one of countries like Belgium in the one case or Poland in the other, those two terrible conflicts might well never have broken out? And does he therefore share my concern that the virus of isolationism is once again on the move in certain parts of the American political spectrum?
Thank you for that question. Firstly, I was able to make clear our unshakable commitment to the nuclear deterrent, something I did in opposition. I've been able to make absolutely clear as Prime Minister, and it was very important that I did so from the outset. In relation to what may have happened in the past, I won't speculate, but I do believe that NATO is the most successful alliance the world has ever known, and that it is as needed now as it was when it was founded. The Labour then government was very proud to be a founder member of NATO, and it was very important for me to reaffirm our unshakable support for NATO. The world is a more volatile place. The challenges are greater now than they've been for many years. And I think that NATO is as needed now and as relevant now as it's ever been in its history. Thank you.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, for the leadership he showed not just at NATO but the European political community. Working together and collaborating is important, not least in an unstable world that we're in. Could he set out for the House what discussions he had about the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement in the light of its renegotiation deadlines next year?
Thank you. I was able to have early discussion about the EU-UK trade arrangements of a preliminary sort. There is an appetite for that discussion. Nobody pretends that it's an easy discussion. And I'm pleased to have appointed a minister who will take responsibility for that important work. It does not involve rejoining the EU. It does involve resetting and improving the relationship we have with our EU allies. Thank you.
Sir Julian Smith.
Congratulate the Prime Minister on his election win and wish him the very best in his new role. Building on the last question, the EPC summit seemed very positive. How does he see using this political locus to get the UK in the best possible position for the renegotiation of the TCA in 2026?
I thank the honourable member for his comments. I do think that there is an appetite now for a different discussion about our future relations with the EU, whether that's trade, whether that's education and research, or whether it's security cooperation. I think particularly in light of what's happened in Ukraine, there is a shared sense that there's room for closer work and closer ties there. So they're the three main areas. It's at very early stages, but the reset was very well received by very many European allies, and I was very pleased to have that early opportunity to set out our case. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's statement will be warmly welcomed by the people of Rochdale, particularly the Ukrainian community, which has flourished in our town for nearly 80 years. So can I pass on to him a direct message from Olga Kurtyunik, who is the chair of the Rochdale branch of the Association of Ukrainians in Great Britain, who told me yesterday she's very, very grateful for the Prime Minister's continued support for President Zelensky in the fight against this illegal war that Putin waged.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear that and to be able to make that clear commitment. But I do want to emphasise this is the continuation of the work of the previous government, which we fully supported before and fully support now. And therefore, I think what is also important for our communities and certainly important for the international community is to see the unity that we've been able to maintain here in this chamber. The world watches in relation to our unity, and it's very important, therefore, that we maintain it as we go forward. Thank you.
Stephen Giffins.
Mr. Speaker, can I add my personal congratulations to the Prime Minister on this election win as well. Mr. Speaker, the international rules-based system is the cornerstone of peace and security. When the Prime Minister talks of a ceasefire in Gaza and implication of the rule of law, what measures is he willing to take to make sure that's implemented? And furthermore, being outside the EU makes us less safe. The populists who want us to turn away from the EU and towards Trump-style isolationism are playing straight into Putin's hands. So what are we doing to get closer to the EU?
Well, on both those points, firstly, in relation to a ceasefire, obviously talks are underway at quite an advanced stage, and we have already urged all sides in the international discussions that I've had to move forward on a ceasefire, because without a ceasefire it's very difficult to envisage the circumstances in which further hostages can come out safely, aid can go in the scale that's desperately needed, but also a ceasefire can be a foot in the door for the beginning of a process, however remote it may seem at the moment, to a two-state solution. In relation to the EU, look, we've got a shared interest in safety and security with our EU allies, and that was very much the topic of discussion we had at the EPC summit last week.
Josh Simons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For my constituents in Makerfield, restoring control over our borders is a key issue of concern. It's become a matter of public trust. Does the Prime Minister agree that the new Border Security Command is an opportunity to show how the UK can play a leading role in tackling criminal smuggler gangs?
Prime Minister.
Yes, I do. And the command is based on the work that I did as Director of Public Prosecutions, working with law enforcement, security, intelligence sharing with our allies in the cases I was working on to deal with counter-terrorism. And I've never accepted the argument that the only gangs that apparently can't be taken down using the same techniques are the gangs that are running this vile trade. There was a real interest in what we were saying at the EPC summit last week, and an understanding that if we do share intelligence, data, strategy and approach, that we can all do more to bring down these vile gangs. Thank you.
Sir John Whittingdale.
May I welcome the Prime Minister's reiteration that the UK remains the strongest supporter of Ukraine against Russian aggression. But can he say what support we can also give to another former Soviet state, Armenia, both in resolving its conflict with Azerbaijan, but also in pursuing its ambition to move closer to NATO and to the European Union in the face of Russian threats and intimidation?
Prime Minister.
I'm grateful for that question. This did come up in the discussions last Thursday, as would have been expected, with a joint resolve to provide the support that is needed, the framework that is needed for peace and security across the entire region. And that is something where I do think, again, there's a shared intent with our allies to work together on it, because it is of such importance. Thank you for raising it.
Fred Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm one of 12 newly elected members on this side of the House who've served in the armed forces. And in Plymouth, so many of my friends and neighbours have served as well. And all of us are deeply concerned by the ongoing illegal invasion and inhumane, increasingly barbaric tactics that Russia is using. Will the Prime Minister agree with me that in an uncertain world, one thing we can be sure of is that Ukraine has got no firmer friend than the UK?
Yes, I can confirm that and emphasise just how important it is. We did have the honour of hosting President Zelensky at Downing Street on Friday, where I was able to make that clear, but again to take the opportunity that we were building on the work of the previous government, not departing from that work. And I think the support of the UK in particular to Ukraine has been leading, it's been important, it's been provided at difficult times, which has often led to others moving in accordance to the moves that we have made as a country. And President Zelensky is grateful for the role that we have played in the past and that we continue to play now.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
My constituents in Sleaford and North Hykeham are very concerned about levels of illegal migration, and particularly people crossing the Channel. And I was pleased to hear the Prime Minister say that he wants to tackle it. He mentioned two measures, £84 million to tackle root causes, and he also mentioned the focus, which arguably is already present on law enforcement. There were 1,500 people cross the Channel in the last 7 days. How many of those people would he expect to have been deterred by the measures he described?
Well, I'm grateful for the question. This is a real problem that we've inherited, because not enough attention has been paid to border control, in my view. record numbers have come this year, and the measures that have been taken by the last government were patently not working. So we need to address that. That's why we've taken early steps to set up the Border Security Command. It's also why we've already moved more staff into the returns unit so it can get on with the job of actually returning those that have no right to be here. 100 staff moved already in the early days of this government. But we do have to recognise that we also need to address the reasons that people move in the first place, which is very much to do with conflict, to do with poverty and to do with climate change. And if we ignore those upstream causes, then we will never fully get to grips with the problem which is so obvious to so many people in this country.
Andrew Lewin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Prime Minister for his statement. I want to thank him particularly for his commitment to resetting our relationship with the European Union. It is with regret that the deal signed by the party opposite when they were in government did real damage to our economy, put up barriers to trade with the European Union and increased red tape. Will the Prime Minister agree with me that now is the time for a new relationship and to take practical measures to increase our alignment with the European Union, such as the mutual recognition of professional qualifications, so we can help our services and get our economy moving again?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for those questions. Look, I don't think the deal we've got is good enough. I think if you talk to any business that deals with the EU, they would complain that it's not good enough for them. It's made trade harder, not easier, and that's a real problem. So we can do better than that. And the EPC was an early opportunity for us to reset our relationship and begin progress towards that better relationship, whether it's in relation to trade or defence and security, which are both very, very important to us. Thank you.
Liz Roberts.
And I welcome that the Prime Minister says that there is an appetite for a reset in our relationship with our European neighbours. And of course, a core element of collective European security is collective economic security. He knows that being outside the single market and the custom union has cost the UK economy almost £140 billion. So how will he remedy this toxic Tory legacy by continuing to refuse even considering rejoining these economic structures?
I do think the relationship can improve. I think we can have a better relationship, but I don't think we can simply ignore the referendum and go back into the EU. And in the discussions I had with our European allies, none of them were urging us to take that course. They were interested in the argument we're making about a better relationship and how that can work in relation to trade, in relation to education, in relation to security and defence. And that's why I wanted to be very clear from the outset what our approach is. Thank you.
Joe Morris.
Mr. Speaker, the Hexham constituency, as the Prime Minister will know, is proudly home to the Otterburn Rangers, which has played a key role in training our armed forces for decades. I'd like to know what steps the Prime Minister will take to improve the working relationship between our armed forces and those of our NATO allies.
Well, I'm grateful for that question. Our armed forces provide huge resource to NATO, particularly in Europe, and of course fully committed in almost every respect to NATO across our armed forces. So I think there's huge room for further such work, building on what is clearly working already. Thank you.
Maltos.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has given us fine words about the importance of our membership of international institutions, and in particular international courts. And I agree with him. It's profoundly in our national interest that we're a member of these organisations. But he will know as well as I that those courts are only as good as the action and consequence that flows from their judgment. Without action and consequence, then their judgments just become hot air. So in relation to Israel-Gaza, and in particular the occupation of the West Bank, could he please assure us that he's considering hard consequences for the very obvious flagrant breach of international law that's taking place on a daily basis in that part of the world?
I'm grateful for that question because I believe in international law, and I think it's very important that we keep to our commitments in international law. We're known for that as a nation, and it matters to the world. In relation to the courts, I respect their independence. Obviously, we will have robust discussion about the particular judgments or actions that they might publish and decisions that they come to. But it is important, if you believe in international law, to be equally clear that we support the independence of the courts. Without that anchor, then we do not have the framework that is so important to us in terms of enforcing international law. Thank you.
Adam Georgie.
I welcome the Prime Minister's statement and very much echo his words about President Biden. Does the Prime Minister agree with me and the people of Newcastle-under-Lyme that the only way to stop illegal migration and the subsequent tragic loss of life is by our United Kingdom working closely and more closely with our European neighbours to smash the gangs who run this vile trade?
Yes, I do. And we've already been able to put further resource into Europol. And the discussions we had about sharing data and intelligence, an overarching strategy on prosecutions, was a very live discussion last Thursday with our European allies who were keen to learn more about what we were proposing and how they could play their part with us to smash the gangs. Because they operate across borders, this can only be done in conjunction with and collaboration with our EU partners.
Richard Ford.
Yeah. The last government spent quite some time engaging with isolationists in Washington. They sought to influence conservative think tanks in the US that are listened to by Republicans, such as the Heritage Foundation. I appreciate the point that the Prime Minister makes, that it is for the American people to decide who governs them later this year. Yet, what more can his government do to stress to Republicans and to candidate Trump that European and American security are indivisible?
Well, in relation to the first part of the question, luckily I don't answer for the last government, I answer for this government. On the question, look, we will work with whoever the American people elect in as president, but and specifically on the question, the relationship, the special relationship between the UK and the US is, it was forged in the most difficult of circumstances. It's endured for many years, and I think it is important both to the US and the UK to maintain that special relationship. I've had the early opportunity to make my position clear on this, which again is a continuation of the position of the last government, and that special relationship matters to us, whoever ends up being the President of America.
Sally Jameson.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister agree with me that we need a NATO-first defence policy in the face of growing Russian aggression like we've seen in Ukraine? And will he also join me in paying tribute to the Doncaster Ukrainian Centre in my constituency, who have worked around the clock and tirelessly to support Ukrainian refugees, demonstrating the true community spirit of Doncaster?
Yeah. Well, let me start by joining in that and making it clear how important that work that's done in so many communities is really important in terms of the support that is shown and the welcome actually it's shown as well to refugees. In relation to the point about NATO first, this is very important. As I say, we're very proud to have been the founding members among the founding members of NATO, and the review that we've put into place does have framework principles, one of which is NATO first, so that will inform the way in which we conduct the strategic review. Thank you.
Sir Desmond Swain.
Why do we continue to limit Ukraine's ability to take the fight to Russia?
Well, look, the approach to capability which has been provided from the UK remains the same now as it was 3 weeks ago. So no different decisions have been taken based on the principles of recognising Ukraine's right to self-defence and the parameters of international law. I think that's right, and that's why no new decisions have been taken in relation to that.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister agree with me that the strength and unity of purpose expressed by our international alliances is mirrored and indeed enhanced by the solidarity with which the British people have shown friendship in accommodating Ukrainians in this country? And would he join me in praising the work of the Rugby Ukrainian community and assuring me that his government will continue to support such groups going forward?
Yes, on both points. I was very struck a number of months ago when I was in Swindon with Ukrainian women who were leading some of the workshops on businesses and success and the incredible contribution they were making. On the main point about the attitude of the British people, it was really good to be able to say to President Zelensky, as I did, that we've just had an election and that we've been all over the United Kingdom, and pretty well wherever we went, you saw the Ukrainian flag and people supporting Ukraine, irrespective of party political differences. There was a real sense that the whole country, as well as the government and the opposition here, support Ukraine and are determined to do whatever they can to stand up to Russian aggression. And I think we should be really proud of the fact that we see that right across the country.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate the Prime Minister on the office he's achieved and thank him for the statement he's given today, and I'm pleased with the decision to remain as part of the European Convention on Human Rights. In all the meetings he's had with both the EU and NATO, was the issue of global war considered? The issues not just of the wars in Ukraine and Palestine, but also in Sudan, in Congo and Yemen, and the possibilities of involving the UN much more in looking towards a more peaceful future rather than a continued greater expenditure on arms. And if we are to follow the role of international law, whilst I'm pleased that he's called for a ceasefire in Gaza, surely it needs to go a bit further and call for the withdrawal of Israeli occupying forces in both Gaza and the West Bank, and an end to our complicity by the supplying of arms to Israel.
Can I just gently say to Honourable Gentleman, I've got a lot more to get in as well. As important as his message is, I need to make others heard. Prime Minister.
Let me deal with both points. Firstly, in relation to conflict resolution, yes, that did come up because we had a very full discussion about illegal migration, about the law enforcement aspect of it, as I've explained, but also about the root causes of migration, conflict, poverty and climate change being key among them. In relation to a ceasefire, look, the prospect of a ceasefire is there. I'm urging all parties to take that opportunity, which is an important foot in the door for the political process that I believe is the only process that's going to bring about lasting peace and resolution in the Middle East, which is why it's so important.
Katie White.
I congratulate the Prime Minister on clearly a very successful set of meetings over the last week. But can I ask my right honourable friend, does he agree that the shift in relationship with the European Union, led by the previous government, has indeed made us economically poorer and undermined small businesses, like the toy shop in my constituency in Horsforth, which closed? Can I ask, will he ensure that small businesses and their needs and prosperity will be at the heart of any renegotiation deal in 2 years' time?
Well, I'm grateful for that question. Look, there are businesses across the country who are dealing with Europe who do feel that the deal that this government, the last government, negotiated is not good enough for them, and it's made trading much harder for them, which is why they're encouraging of us to reset that relationship and make sure that we get a better deal. It would be better for our country, be better for our businesses and better for our economy, and our number one mission in government is to grow our economy, and so it's very important to be seen in that context as well.
Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Blow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I congratulate the Prime Minister too on what has obviously been a successful series of meetings last week. He set out some of his new policies to deal with illegal migration across the Channel today and return illegal migrants from this country. Over what sort of timescale could the British people reasonably expect his new policies to start to have a real effect on these issues?
Well, we've taken early measures because I know that the British people want to see the impact, they want to see a difference. And they do feel very much that in recent years there's been a loss of control of the borders, and that is a matter of border security and actually a matter of national security. So that is why we've acted quickly to begin the steps to better set up the Border Security Command. That is why we've already begun to put more staff in the returns unit and taken a decision in relation to the upstream work that is needed to reduce the likelihood of migration in the first place. They are early steps. I'm not going to put an arbitrary date on it, but I do understand the thrust of the question, which is that this is an area of great importance where the British people want to see a material change in the situation as it now is.
Mark Ferguson.
Mr. Speaker, in Gateshead Central and Wickham and across the North East, those who have fled Putin's war in Ukraine want to make the most of their time in our community, but above all, they want to know that the British people stand with them. So I thank the Prime Minister for his ongoing support for the people of Ukraine. But can he expand further on Ukraine's future entry into NATO, which is so critically important?
Yes, I can. I'm grateful for the opportunity to do so. The NATO Council committed itself to an irreversible path to membership of NATO. That is a material step forward from a year ago, and it's among the reasons that President Zelensky said that the Council was a success in relation to membership of NATO. And that's why I said what I'd said in my statement, but now that path is irreversible, and that is a good thing, welcomed across the NATO allies. Thank you.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The level of infiltration by Hamas into UNRWA is well documented. From UNRWA staff taking part in the pure evil that was the 7th of October attack, to UNRWA-funded schools being used to store weapons and harbour terrorists, to terror infrastructure being found under UNRWA's own headquarters in Gaza City. So can I ask the Prime Minister, before he took the decision to recommit UK taxpayers' money to UNRWA, what advice did he receive on that infiltration, and what steps has he demanded that UK taxpayers' money can never, ever be used to fund terror or preach hate?
Well, as the honourable member would expect, we took the most careful advice and subjected it to the most careful consideration, because we were concerned, as anyone in this House would be concerned, by the suggestions and allegations in relation to October the 7th. So we took that really carefully, very seriously, with the utmost consideration. There has, of course, been an independent review and steps put in place, but there is a vital role for UNRWA. Many other countries have restored funding for UNRWA. It is the right thing to do, but I can give an assurance that the most careful consideration was given before that step was taken, as the honourable member would have expected.
Joe Powell.
Speaker, can I warmly welcome the announcement that the UK will lead an initiative to crack down on Russia's shadow fleet of sanctions-evading ships that are helping generate dirty money to fund their war machine? And will the Prime Minister continue to make sanctions enforcement a priority and update this House on the state of international negotiations to utilise frozen Russian assets, including those in Kensington and Bayswater, to support Ukraine now?
Well, I'm grateful for that question, and I think there was important progress at NATO in relation to sanctions, and I do think it's important for the House to have regular updates, and therefore we can commit to give the next update as soon as it's appropriate to do so. But I think across the House there is a resolve to use sanctions as effectively as they can be used as one of the weapons in relation to Russian aggression. Thank you.
Colin Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hope the Prime Minister enjoyed welcoming fellow European leaders to Blenheim Palace in my constituency. One of my constituents, Rose, is currently studying Spanish and French at Southampton University. She would like to spend her year abroad working in Spain to strengthen her language skills and improve her employment prospects. Yet, as it stands, she has no right to work there. I hope the Prime Minister saw the benefit of working with his European counterparts and perhaps making a few new friends. I hear his response on not rejoining the political structures, but as a specific measure to improve the opportunities for young people, will he open talks with the European Union on a youth mobility scheme?
Well, it was very good to be in the honourable member's constituency at Blenheim Palace, and I can't tell him how many European leaders said to me that they had previously visited, usually whilst they were studying in the UK, but only paid the £5 to get into the grounds because they hadn't had the money to get into the building, which they were then entering, which was a common theme. On the substance of his question, look, we're not returning to freedom of movement, but I do understand the desire of people to work in other countries. But look, I need to be clear, there's no rejoining the EU, there's no rejoining the single market or the customs union or return to freedom of movement. But I do believe there's a better deal that we can work on. And I think that the more we can work across the House on that, the better, because then it will be the more enduring.
Peter Swallow.
Mr. Speaker. As the proud home of the RMA Sandhurst, my constituency knows the vital importance of our armed forces in keeping Britain safe. So I warmly welcome the government's commitment to setting out a path to 2.5% GDP spending on defence. Can the Prime Minister update us on conversations he's had with our NATO friends and allies to encourage others to match this target?
Well, I'm proud of the commitment we already make to NATO over the 2%, and we did have a discussion at the NATO Council, as you'd expect, on the need for all NATO members to make that contribution and to increase their contribution, and there was a commitment to do so. Our commitment to 2.5% will be set out, and the path to it will be set out by the Chancellor of the future fiscal event. Thank you.
Mike Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in seeking to reset Britain's relationship with the European Union, can the Prime Minister confirm that his government will not accept EU rules automatically applying in Britain unless they have been specifically agreed by this Parliament?
Yes.
Oliver Ryan.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for the leadership that he's shown in his discussions at Blenheim, especially on NATO? I'm proud to see the Prime Minister recommit us to a two-state solution in the Middle East and to an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Does he agree with me that this conflict is urgent and dire, but needs sober and considerate solutions rather than extreme rhetoric from those who might seek to sow further divisions?
Yes, I do, and I'm grateful for that question, because there is the prospect of a ceasefire. It is desperately needed for the reasons we've already discussed. It will only happen if there's international agreement and a sober assessment that provides the framework for the remaining hostages to be released. I shudder to think of the state of some of them. For the aid desperately to be allowed in at the scale it's needed, and for beginning of the process, in my view, the only process that will lead to a lasting resolution of this awful conflict. And I think that it's all of our, not just interest, but duty to do everything we can to ensure that that comes about.
That completes the first statement. I'll let the front bench change over. Right, we now come to the next statement, but before we start, can I just say to the Home Secretary, the statement didn't arrive in my office, it was late. I believe it was also late to the opposition, and quite rightly, you made a big thing of it as Shadow Home Secretary, so I'm just reminding you of your words back, that we do need to get on time. This second time so far, and I know it won't happen again, it will be taken on board. I now call the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank you for standing up for the opposition front benches, as I know you have done so very often for me in the past, and apologise to the Shadow Home Secretary for any delay in the statement. Mr. Speaker, most people in the UK want to see strong border security with a properly controlled and managed asylum system where our country does its bit to, alongside others, to help those who have fled persecution, but where rules are properly respected and enforced, so those with no right to be here are swiftly removed. At the moment, we have none of those things. Border security is being undermined by criminal smuggler gangs, and the asylum system is in chaos. 19 lives have been tragically lost in the Channel so far this year, including children. No one should be making these perilous small boat journeys. Criminal gangs have been allowed to take hold along our border, and they are making huge profit from undermining our border security and putting lives at risk. They should not be able to get away with it. Crossings in the first half of 2024 are up by 10% on last year, numbers going up instead of coming down, and at the same time, the asylum backlog is getting worse as decision-making in the Home Office has dropped. And a Home Office spending on asylum support has increased sevenfold in the space of just 3 years. This cannot go on. So since my appointment 2 weeks ago, I have reviewed the policies, programmes and legislation that we have inherited from our predecessors, and I have been shocked by what I have found. Not only are there already serious problems, but on current policies, the chaos and costs will likely get worse. First, on our border security. It's clear that the security and enforcement arrangements we've inherited are too weak. Criminal gang networks are operating with impunity along our border, across the continent and beyond, and across the UK too. Action along the Channel between Britain and France has improved and is preventing some boat crossings. The work of the Small Boats Operational Command in the Channel is important and will continue. But we need to go much further. We should be taking far more action upstream long before the boats ever reach the French coast. Cooperation with Europol and other European police forces and prosecutors is far too limited, and enforcement against exploitation and trafficking in the UK is far too weak. Information sharing with our European neighbours has reduced rather than increased. And as a result of these weak arrangements, I am extremely concerned that high levels of dangerous crossings we have inherited are likely to persist through the summer. Mr. Speaker, let me return to the Rwanda Migration and Economic Development Partnership. So 2.5 years after the previous government launched it, I can report it has already cost the British taxpayer £700 million in order to send just 4 volunteers. Those costs include £290 million payments to Rwanda, chartering flights that never took off, detaining hundreds of people and then releasing them, and paying for more than 1,000 civil servants to work on the scheme. A scheme to send 4 people. It is the most shocking waste of taxpayers' money I have ever seen. Looking forward, the costs are set to get worse. Even if the scheme had ever got going, it's clear it would only cover a minority of arrivals. Yet a substantial portion of future costs were fixed costs. For example, the annual direct payments to Rwanda, the contracts for escorts, the staffing in the Home Office, the detention and reception centres and more. So the taxpayer would still have to pay out no matter how few people were relocated. And most shocking of all, over the 6 years of the Migration and Economic Development Partnership forecast, the previous government had planned to spend over £10 billion of taxpayers' money on the scheme. They did not tell Parliament that. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Rwandan government for working with the UK in good faith, because the failure for this policy lies with the previous UK government. It has been a costly con, and the taxpayer has had to pay the price. Let me turn now to the Illegal Migration Act. This law has been in place for a year. We were told it would stop the boats. That has clearly failed. The legal contradictions in the Act are so great they make it unworkable. Indeed, 12 months on, the central duty has not even been enacted. It is also costing the taxpayer billions of pounds. Under Section 9 of the Act, people who arrive can claim asylum and get asylum accommodation. But under Section 30, if they arrive after March 2023 and meet key conditions in the Act, no decision can be taken on their case. They just stay in the asylum system. Even if they've come here unlawfully for economic reasons and should be returned to their home country, they won't be, because the law doesn't work. Only a small minority might ever have been sent to Rwanda. Everyone else stays indefinitely in taxpayer-funded accommodation and support. Now, the Home Office estimate that around 40% of asylum cases since March of 2023 should be covered by these Illegal Migration Act conditions. The remaining 60% under the previous government's policy should still have been processed and cleared in the normal way. However, even though previous ministers introduced this new law 12 months ago, they didn't ever introduce an effective operational way for the Home Office to distinguish between the cases covered by the Illegal Migration Act and the other cases where decisions should continue, between the 40% and the 60%. So as a result, decisions can't be taken on any of them. I have been shocked to discover that the Home Office has effectively stopped making the majority of asylum decisions. Thousands of asylum caseworkers cannot do their proper job, and as a result, the backlog of asylum cases is now going up. It is the most extraordinary policy I have ever seen. We have inherited Asylum Hotel California. People arrive in the asylum system and they never leave. The previous government's policy was effectively an amnesty, and that is the wrong thing to do. And it isn't just bad policy, it's also completely unaffordable. The cost of this indefinitely rising asylum backlog in hotel and accommodation support bills is astronomical. The potential costs of asylum support over the next 4 years, if we continue down this track, could be an eye-watering £30 to £40 billion. That is double the annual police budget for England and Wales. Mr. Speaker, this newly elected government is not prepared to let this chaos continue. So let me turn to the action we are urgently taking to restore some grip to the system, to tackle the chaos and to get costs down. First, I have informed the Rwandan government we will be ending the Migration and Economic Development Partnership. We will save £220 million on further direct payments to Rwanda over the next few years, and we will immediately save up to £750 million that had been put aside by the previous government to cover the MEDP this year. Second, we will invest some of the saved money from the Migration Partnership into a new Border Security Command instead. It will bring together the work of the Border Force, the National Crime Agency, the Small Boats Operational Command, intelligence and security officers. The recruitment has begun for a new commander, and we will put in place additional cross-border officers, investigators, prosecutors, intelligence and security officers, with new counter-terror-style powers against organised immigration crime announced in the King's speech last week. We're immediately increasing UK officers' involvement in Europol and the European Migrant Smuggling Centre. And third, we will replace the Rwanda Migration Partnership with a serious returns and enforcement programme. We have immediately replaced the flight planning for Rwanda with actual flights to return people who have no right to stay to their home countries instead. We're immediately redeploying Home Office staff away from the failed Rwanda partnership and into returns and enforcement to reverse the collapse in removals that has taken place since 2010. And I have tasked the Immigration Enforcement Team with intensifying enforcement activity this summer, targeting illegal working across high-risk sectors. Fourth, we will end the asylum chaos and start taking asylum decisions again so we can clear the backlog and end asylum hotels. The new Border Security Asylum and Immigration Bill announced in the King's speech will bring in new replacement arrangements, including fast-track decisions and returns to safe countries. But in the meantime, I am laying a statutory instrument which ends the retrospective nature of the Illegal Migration Act provisions so that the Home Office can immediately start clearing cases from after March 2023. Mr. Speaker, making this one simple change will save the taxpayer an estimated £7 billion over the next 10 years. And fifth, as the Prime Minister has just set out, we will work closely with our European neighbours to tackle the upstream causes of migration, including through the Rome process. Mr. Speaker, this country will always do our bit alongside others to help those fleeing war and persecution. But we need a proper system where rules are enforced. There are no quick fixes to the chaos created over the last 14 years, and it will take time to clear the asylum backlog, to bring costs down, to get new enforcement in place to strengthen our borders and prevent dangerous boat crossings. But there is no alternative to serious, hard graft. We cannot waste any more time or money on gimmicks. The country voted for change, and that means it is time for a sensible and serious plan. I commend this statement to the House.
Just say a very important statement, and it ran over slightly, so I'm more than happy for the front bench spokespersons also to run over if need be. Shadow Home Secretary James Cleverly.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. And I welcome you back to your place, my first opportunity to do so. In my time both as Home Secretary and indeed before that as Foreign Secretary, you were very kind to me, my minor indiscretions at the dispatch box, late deployment of statements and slight overrunnings. As you know, you've also been very, very kind to my family in sometimes quite trying circumstances, and I very much appreciate that. I also want to take this opportunity to congratulate the Right Honourable Lady on her appointment as Home Secretary. It is a challenging but incredibly rewarding job, and I genuinely, because the security of this nation is now very much in the hands of her and her ministers, I genuinely wish her all the success and everything she is looking to do. And I know she inherits in the Home Office a dedicated team of civil servants who will help her keep the country safe and secure. They did that to me when I was in her position. I'd also like to take this opportunity, of course, it's disorderly to recognise their presence, but if I were to wave my hand vaguely in this direction, I might also take the opportunity to thank my previous private office civil servants. It says here, I want to thank the Home Secretary and her team for advance sight of the statement. I just put a line through that. The Labour Party and indeed the Home Secretary in her statement like to talk tough on border security, but today's statement, despite all the hyperbole and the made-up numbers, is basically an admission of what we knew all along, is that the Labour Party have scrapped the Rwanda partnership on ideological grounds, removed a deterrent which the National Crime Agency said that we needed, and the level of discourtesy directed towards the people and government of Rwanda is quite breathtaking. To have them read about this decision in the papers before anyone from government had the good grace to formally notify them, I think is an error, and no one in this House believes for a moment that that level of discourtesy would have happened had this partnership been with a European country. Labour has given an effective amnesty to thousands of asylum seekers who are banned under Conservative plans. And Labour's plans amount to doing less than we were doing when we were in government and merely changing the signs above a few desks at the Home Office with their so-called border command and their returns unit. Before the election, the Right Honourable Lady said that she would create a returns unit. Now, the narrative is that she is going to redeploy some staff, not increase the number of staff, redeploy some staff, showing that the returns function already exists. And the fact there is now no safe third country to return people to who cannot be returned home means that we ask, where is she going to send the people who come here from countries like Afghanistan or Iran, in Syria? Has she started negotiations on returns agreements with the Taliban or the Ayatollahs of Iran or Assad in Syria? And if she's not going to send anyone that arrives here on small boats to Rwanda, which local authorities will she be sending people to? We were closing hotels when I was in government, and I wonder which local authorities will be receiving those asylum seekers. If not Rwanda, will it be Rochdale or Romford or Richmond? And most importantly, can the Right Honourable Lady now confirm that if you arrive here illegally in a small boat, you will be able to claim asylum? And finally, will she confirm how long after she briefed the media that she was scrapping the partnership with Rwanda did she have the courtesy to speak directly with the Rwandan government? And it is because we now have no deterrent that nobody wants to take on the role of the head of her new so-called border command. Neil Basu, former senior police officer, a man who I have huge respect for, was Labour's #1 choice. He's ruled himself out. And we now learn that General Stuart Skeets, again, a very highly respected former British Army general who was in large part responsible for delivering the Albania deal, which cut small boat arrivals by 90% from that country, has resigned from his position as Director of Strategic Operations. To misquote Oscar Wilde, to lose one border commander could be seen as a misfortune. To lose two looks like carelessness, perhaps even incompetence. I also notice, and it's available online for those who are thinking of applying, that the new job advert for Labour's Border Security Command is located not in Kent, where the channel is, but is flexible from Belfast, Bristol, Cardiff, Durham, Glasgow, Liverpool or Manchester, none of which, the last time I checked, are anywhere near the English Channel. The reality is, everybody knows, including the people smugglers, that the small boat problem is going to get worse, indeed has already got worse under Labour because they have no deterrent. People are being sold a lie when they're being smuggled into this country across the busiest shipping lanes. And we do need to stop them. Too many lives have already been lost. Sadly, 6 more have been lost in the Channel in the last few weeks, and our hearts go out to them and their loved ones. We disagree on many things, but we can agree that we need to put an end to this evil trade. But sadly, the initial decisions that her government has made this problem worse and not better.
Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the words that the Shadow Home Secretary gave about the dedication of the Home Office officials and also the importance of work on national security. As he will know, when I was in the shadows, I always worked with him and supported him around national security issues. I know he will do the same as well, and I welcome him to his shadow post as well. I presume this was the first of the Conservative leadership speeches, contest speeches that we have heard today. Let me just respond to some of the things that the Shadow Home Secretary has said. Look, you realise, let's all be very clear, what it is we have inherited from him and from his party. We've had the highest level of spring crossings ever. Yeah. That is what has happened under his party. We've had gangs left to wreak havoc, not just along the French coast, but across our border, through our country and back through Europe as well. We've got asylum supports costs set to rise to £30 to £40 billion over the next 4 years as a result of his decisions and his party. And as for this idea about deterrent, I'm really sorry. I'm sorry. 4 volunteers being sent to Rwanda isn't a deterrent to anyone for anything at all. And the idea that he would spend £10 billion on this fantasy, this fiction, this gimmick, rather than ever do the hard graft. Actually, £700 million has already been spent on sending just 4 volunteers in 2.5 years. Now, we had often warned that it would frankly be cheaper to put them up in the Paris Ritz. Frankly, it turns out, it would actually be cheaper to buy the Paris Ritz. And as for the amnesties, I don't know if he has ever understood the Illegal Migration Act that he voted for and then he inherited from his predecessors, because when he asks what happens to people who arrive illegally and can they claim asylum, that is exactly what happens under Section 9 of his Illegal Migration Act. They can all claim asylum and they can all enter the asylum system and will be entitled to asylum support. That is what happens. That is the system that he's been presiding over and running since he became Home Secretary. That is the system that we have now inherited. The problem is, people enter the asylum system and they never ever leave. He didn't even bring in the operational arrangements to try and properly take decisions, and his Home Office effectively stopped taking the majority of asylum decisions in May. Maybe he didn't even know, but that is what's happened in his Home Office. Mr. Speaker, this party and this government doesn't believe in amnesties. We think the rules need to be respected and enforced. His party is the one who has actually given an effective amnesty to people who can stay in the asylum system forever. We believe the rules should be enforced. The problem is actually that is what the Shadow Home Secretary believes too. I don't think he believes any of the stuff that he said. He's only saying it for his Tory leadership contest. He's just too weak to tell his party the truth. He thought the whole policy on Rwanda was batshit, and then he went out to bat for it. It's just not serious.
I bet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome my right honourable friend to her place and thank her for her statement. I think we all suspected that policy in the Home Office under the last government was a bit of a mess. I don't think we realised how much of an expensive mess it was till she's provided that in her statement. Just ask the Home Secretary about the attraction for people coming here illegally to work in the black economy. If there are suspicions, then you have to go to HMRC, the Gang Masters Authority, UK Visas and the police to get action to deal with those activities. I note that the Home Secretary is looking to try and combine them now to deal with illegal working in the car washing sector. Is that going to be a systematic change of approach, and is it going to be applied to other sectors as well? I think it's very welcome if it is.
Well, my honourable friend is right. We have to tackle the illegal working and also the exploitation that can often drive a lot of what happens, and that is why we are intensifying the immigration enforcement part of our new huge expansion in reforms in returns and enforcement unit as part of our plans. But he is right that the process also needs to be simplified because it has become too complicated and too bureaucratic actually to just make sure that the rules are being enforced. We have set out high-risk sectors that we want to focus on this summer, but we need a more systematic approach. We have talked about a single enforcement approach, and we will set out more details about those plans.
We now come to Lib Dem spokesperson Richard Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the year 2018, the number of small boat arrivals stood at 299. In the year 2023, last year, the number was over 29,000. What happened in those intervening 5 years? One thing that happened in those intervening 5 years was the closure of the Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme. The Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme was introduced by the coalition government in 2014 and was designed to select some of the most vulnerable people from refugee camps in Jordan near Syria. And what we've seen since the closure of that scheme is people choosing instead to make for these shores rather than applying in refugee camps. So, will she rule out the offshore processing of asylum seekers? Or will she consider introducing a scheme similar to the Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme that could serve to incentivise asylum seekers applying for asylum close to the war zones that are afflicting them?
Can I welcome the honourable member to his post speaking on these issues. He's right to talk about the importance of the UK doing its bits to help those who have fled persecution and conflict. It's why I strongly believe that the Homes for Ukraine programme was immensely important. It's been important personally to our family. It's why I think it's been so important that the UK has done its bit in previous years as well, including around Hong Kong and Afghanistan as well. And that must continue to be the case. It has to be alongside a properly functioning system, though. Otherwise, criminal gangs will continue to exploit whatever the system is, and at the moment, those criminal gangs are getting away with it. On the specific issue around offshore processing, in fact, the Vulnerable Persons Scheme was a form of offshore processing, just as the Homes for Ukraine scheme was. So I think there are different ways of having arrangements in place, and our approach is to always look at what works. So long as it meets proper standards in terms of international law, we should be serious about what it is that works in order to tackle the complex problems that we face.
Julie Reid.
My right honourable friend for her statement. I think that my constituents will be incredulous when they're informed of the extent to which the previous government has wasted so much money on this scheme. What commitments can you give the House that for any further programmes and the money that will be spent, that we'll be able to rescind our commitment on those and that no further public money will be wasted?
Well, my honourable friend makes a really important point, and I welcome her to Parliament as well as to asking questions on this issue. We have to have a really strong and rigorous and robust approach to value for money. And that has to be in every department. That cannot simply be the responsibility of the Treasury. It has to be the responsibility of the Home Office, responsibility of every government department. That is the approach that this Labour government will take. I am frankly shocked that not just the Home Office, but actually also the Treasury, the Prime Minister, Cabinet colleagues under the last government all signed off these incredibly high payments and costs. They must have had the modelling that would tell them how much these costs would go up by, and yet they signed it off. Our government is determined to pursue value for money at every stage.
Kit Maltese.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If numbers of small boat crossings next summer are higher than this summer, will she resign?
I realise the honourable member is keen to get rid of me before I've even just stood up at the dispatch box. Unfortunately, I think we have seen a succession of Conservative Home Secretaries who, 8 I think we have had in the last 8 years, none of whom resigned, 2 of whom were sacked. Actually, that was 2 of the same person who were in fact sacked under the last government. Look, we have to be serious about this. We have to be serious about this because the dangerous boat crossings are undermining border security and they are putting lives at risk. Nobody should be making those journeys, and we have to work not just here but also across other European countries as well to stop boats before they reach the French coast in the first place and to make sure that lives can be saved and that the gangs are actually accountable for their terrible crimes.
Joyce Simons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Home Secretary for her statement on the shocking figures that are symbolic of the failure of the members opposite to restore control over our borders. I note that despite this spending of taxpayer cash, removals of failed asylum seekers collapsed and foreign national offenders collapsed under the Conservatives. Can I ask the Home Secretary what the Home Office is doing to ensure that those who've no right to be in the UK are swiftly removed and the rules are properly enforced?
Well, my honourable friend makes an important point. I also welcome him to his seat in Parliament as well. He's right that the removals of failed asylum seekers have fallen by a third since 2010. The removals of foreign national offenders have fallen by a quarter. That is not good enough. It means the rules are not being respected, the rules are not being enforced. And it's why we will set up a new returns and enforcement programme. We have committed to 1,000 additional staff to be working on returns and enforcement to make sure that the rules are in fact respected, to make sure that not only where we have return agreements in place but also looking at individual cases as well, to make sure that we can have a system that people have confidence in. There is a lot of chaos to tackle, but we are determined to do it.
Pete Wishart.
Speaker, the Home Secretary is absolutely right to lay it into the Conservatives for their shambles of an immigration policy that will define them in years to come. But all I'm hearing from the Home Secretary is being harder on asylum seekers. Enforcement seems to be the priority of this Home Secretary now. Where are we hearing about the safe and legal routes that asylum seekers have access to come to this country? And will she stop the dehumanising and scapegoating language? And will she pledge to take no quarter from the belligerents behind me?
I thank the honourable member for his question. I think, as I responded to the Liberal Democrats, making sure that the UK always does its bit to help those who have fled persecution is really important. And we have done so through different programmes in the past. We had the Syrian Families programme back in 2015, which was also important. But we also have to make sure that the system works, that it has credibility and that the rules are enforced. And too often the rules aren't enforced at the moment, and they need to be, so that everyone can respect the system. And also too often we have criminal gangs who are just causing havoc, who are able to undermine border security and who are also making huge profits. It's become a criminal industry along our border, and that is deeply damaging. I do agree with him that this cannot be about rhetoric, and nobody should be just ramping up the rhetoric, especially when it's alongside just gimmicks that don't work. What we've got to do is be serious. We've got to be serious about this and actually put in place sensible plans that work.
Mike Amesbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I welcome the Home Secretary, the Labour Home Secretary, to her place. We've inherited an almighty mess with asylum accommodation costing £8 million per day. It's absolute chaos. And it seems that, according to the Sunday Times, is even middlemen and middlewomen taking advantage and profiteering through this system. How is the Home Secretary going to get a grip of this chaos that we've inherited from the previous Tory government?
My honourable friend raises an important question, because as well as failing to tackle the criminal gangs taking hold along the Channel, there's also been too much of a focus on gimmicks and also a failure to have practical planning in place. So the failure, for example, to make sure that they had proper long-term contracts around asylum accommodation, and instead, when we had the chaos at Manston a couple of years ago, that then led to last-minute hotel procurement, completely inappropriate accommodation, and also costing a fortune as well. So we have to tackle that, and that is why we have set out plans. We're determined to make sure that we can get that backlog down and also end asylum hotel use. As a result of the chaos with the Illegal Migration Act and the fact that the Home Office has stopped taking decisions, that will now take time. That is going to be difficult to take time to sort that out, but that's why the statutory instrument that we're laying today is so important. That alone should save the taxpayer £7 billion.
Dr. Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that the Labour Party managed to go an entire election campaign without answering this question, and that the Home Secretary failed to answer it again when asked by the Shadow Home Secretary, so I'll give it one more try. Where does the Home Secretary intend to send failed asylum seekers from Afghanistan, Syria and Iran?
Again, let me just say to the honourable member, he obviously doesn't understand the system that his party and his government put in place. All the people who are in the asylum system, they're staying there. So they're staying currently under his policies. For those individuals are now being sent all around the country into asylum hotels all over the country. That is the system that they have left us with. We don't think that is the right thing to do. We think that asylum decisions should be taken on a case-by-case basis. That is the right thing to do, and also that we should make sure that we have proper returns agreements, and to do what his party should have been doing under his own policies for the 60% of people who continued to be entitled to asylum decisions but weren't actually getting them under his Illegal Migration Act. So what we will do is run the asylum system effectively. Well, actually, his system should have been doing.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate my right honourable friend for the forensic work that she's been doing in her department. Could I ask her what consideration she has given for a humanitarian visa for people in Gaza to be reunited with their family if they're studying in the UK or working in our NHS? My constituent has his wife and 2 little children in Gaza at the moment. He can't return home, and yet the last government refused to make provision for them to come and be reunited with him in the UK.
Well, my honourable friend will know that there are obviously long-standing arrangements for family reunion for refugees, and obviously there are also different concerns that have been raised around Gaza, because there's a real importance for people being able to return to their homes as well in the Middle East too. But if she has an individual case that she would like to raise with my right honourable friend, the Immigration Minister, then she's very welcome to do so.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now then, when I was in the migrant camps in northern France last year, the migrants told me and some of my colleagues that one of the deterrents that would stop them coming is if they were turned back in the Channel or sent back the same day. Now, we saw the Border Force Agency take a boatload back just last week. So will the Home Secretary now, with that advice, grow a political backbone and order the Border Force to send the boats back the same day?
Yeah.
Well, the honourable member refers to the case where there was an incident in the Channel and where there was cooperation between the Border Force and between the French authorities that did also involve returning people to the French coast. That operational cooperation, I think, is really important. But I would just say to him, cooperation is the really important word here. Because if we want to prevent gangs operating and organising, if we want to prevent boats reaching the French coast in the first place, we have to work closely not just with France, but with Germany, with other European countries, with the countries through which some of the supply chains are operating as well. And it's that cooperation that I know quite often he and some of the others in his party have refused. So that cooperation will be important, and it's our best way to stop the criminal gangs.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In just a few short days, my right honourable friend has simultaneously saved the taxpayers a tremendous amount of money and got more people in the Home Office working on getting this system sorted than we have had in the years that have gone before. So can I congratulate her for that? Does she agree with me that it's entirely in keeping with Labour values to ensure that there's safe refuge for those fleeing a war zone, and at the same time to ensure that those who aren't entitled to be here are repatriated and save the UK taxpayers money?
Well, my honourable friend is right. There are just some principles here about doing our bit to help those who fled persecution, but also making sure that those who have not, the rules are enforced, and that people who don't have a right to be here should be swiftly returned. So at the moment, none of those things apply. None of those things are working properly, and that's why we have to restore order to the asylum system so that we can go back to some of the principles that, if you go back many years, the UK has always stood for.
Paula Denyer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a huge relief that the vile Rwanda scheme has been scrapped, and I've listened very carefully to the Home Secretary's statement. Now, given that 94% of people seeking asylum in this country are ready and eager to work to support themselves, and given that freezing them out of work leaves them in destitution, but also means that the UK misses out on tax revenue from their work and misses out on much-needed specialists and professionals like the nurse I met in an asylum seeker project in Bristol recently, will the Home Secretary take the UNHCR's advice and urgently lift the ban that stops asylum seekers from working?
No, I don't believe that that is the right approach, because what we need to do is to make swift decisions and make sure that the rules are properly respected and enforced. I am concerned about employers who exploit those who have arrived, sometimes as a result of criminal gangs, sometimes as a result of trafficking, sometimes as a result of smuggling. I don't believe that employers should be able to exploit those kinds of routes and journeys. Once, if people have fled persecution, if they are granted asylum in this country, then of course they should be able to work and be able to work swiftly. But if they are not entitled to be here, if they have not fled persecution, if they should be turned down and returned to their home country, then they should not be able to work in the UK.
Mike Tutt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Dover and Deal take this very seriously, being at the very front line of this issue after the Conservatives have left us with open borders. My right honourable friend, thank you for dealing with this with such seriousness. How long will it take for the Border Security Commander to be in place? And when they are, what sort of impact will they have in assisting law enforcement?
Can I thank my honourable friend, welcome to him to his position, and as the honourable member for Dover, I know his constituency has faced some of the real pressures as a result of the criminal gangs and the small boat crossings. I thank him for his work, and I know also his experience in tackling some of these issues, and he knows very well the work of the National Crime Agency, for example, in tackling these criminal gangs. The Border Security Command, we are putting in place the steps for the Border Security Command straight away. So we have already begun the recruitment, not just for the new commander, but also for additional staff, for hundreds of additional cross-border police, security and intelligence officers and specialist investigators and prosecutors. That work will start straight away. We have already immediately increased the UK presence in Europol and also in the European Migrant Smuggling Centre as well, so that we can get on with that work, building those partnerships and taking that action.
Greg Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Home Secretary agrees with me that it is a moral issue in terms of we must never again see people dying in the Channel. But does she agree with me that deterrent must be a part of the panoply that we put forward? So I'm not clear, what deterrent measures is the Home Secretary going to put in place? And because this question has been failed to be answered a number of times, what will happen to failed asylum seekers from countries like Syria, Iran and Afghanistan?
So the honourable member, I agree with him that it is just devastating that lives are being lost, including children. And we've seen increasing violence from some of the gangs crowding more people onto these overcrowded boats, where a little 7-year-old girl ended up losing her life. But he talks about the issue about deterrence. The problem with the Rwanda scheme is it's clearly not a deterrent at all. 4 people being sent over 2.5 years, that is not a deterrent at all. The issue then is that at the moment as well, there are no deterrents for any of the criminal gangs at all. They can just operate with impunity. So you have to start by making sure that the criminal gangs actually can face justice, that there is actually the action on the supply chains earlier on, and make sure that we have consequences and that there is a deterrent there. I would also say that the problem is, I think, when you have a system where people can arrive in the UK and stay in the asylum accommodation system forever, which is the Illegal Migration Act that his party voted for, that also actually means there is no disincentive for anyone, because actually it makes it very easy for people, even if they have no right to be here, to be able to stay indefinitely, to be able to work illegally, and that goes against the rules and means the system is just not working.
Adam Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Home Secretary for her statement today, which I think contains some really quite revelatory points on the state of finances. Now, Sandy Acre in my constituency is home, and long has been home, to 2 of the asylum hotels, one of which I was very pleased to see recently closed. But the Best Western Hotel remains open, and this is a huge cost to people in my constituency and across the nation, and indeed leaves asylum seekers caught in an endless and inescapable limbo that they cannot get out of. What steps will the Home Secretary be taking to make sure that we can close asylum hotels once and for all?
Well, my honourable friend makes a really important point, and we need to clear the backlog, not just let the backlog grow and grow and grow, which is what the Conservatives were doing, but actually to end up clearing the backlog so that, as a result of that, we can end asylum hotels, which are inappropriate and extremely costly. I am concerned that, having discovered that the Home Office had effectively stopped taking the majority of asylum decisions under the Shadow Home Secretary, who doesn't seem to actually know what his own department was doing as a result of his own policies. As a result, that will now take longer to do, but it remains an immensely important thing that we have to do. The other thing we will have to do is to tackle the backlog that they had allowed to grow in the appeals process as well, which is also slowing the system down.
Brian Matthew.
Mr. Speaker, congratulations to the Home Secretary on her appointment and also on her statement to the House. Will asylum seekers, and this is following on, but perhaps with a nuance, will asylum seekers, perhaps after initial registration, be allowed to work and pay taxes while their applications are pending? Thank you.
Well, I think that if people have a right to be in the UK, so if they have fled persecution and have been granted refugee status, if they have come to be here on a visa through the normal processes, then of course we have people contributing to our country and have done so for generations. But I do also think that if people are not here lawfully, who have not fled persecution and actually should fail the asylum system process and be returned, then they should not be working in the UK. So I think this is simply about having a swift system so you can make decisions quickly and make sure that the rules are enforced.
Anna Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm delighted to see my right honourable friend in her place on the government benches. I'm proud that Bradford is a city of sanctuary and of organisations like Bevan Health, set up by a GP in my constituency, that works to deliver healthcare, vital healthcare, to asylum seekers who are awaiting decisions, sometimes over 12 months in many cases, in hotels. So can my right honourable friend provide assurance that asylum seekers will continue to have access to essential healthcare as our government works to clear the asylum backlog, so in future fewer people will be left languishing in hotels? Thank you.
Well, Manfred is right that it's really important that we do try and swiftly clear the backlog as rapidly as possible. It does include some people who are very vulnerable and who may be in need of support. It also includes people who shouldn't be in the UK, and the system should work to operate fairly so they are swiftly returned. But we have to actually get back to decision making. You know, I thought I would be coming to this dispatch box and saying, well, what we want to do is we want to speed up decision-making, we want to accelerate decision-making. I didn't think I would be standing at this dispatch box saying, no, we've got to just restart asylum decision-making in the first place because they've just stopped it. I mean, that I really had not expected. I mean, it really is far more shocking than I had imagined, and I really thought I had a good imagination.
Richard Trice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When you take a drug dealer off the street corner, guess what? Another one appears because of the vile drugs trade and the amount of money involved. My constituents of Boston and Skegness believe it's exactly the same with trying your policy, Home Secretary, of smashing the gangs. If you smash one gang, it's like a game of whack-a-mole. Another one appear, and another one will appear, because there is so much money involved. Here's the point. How long will you give your policy, Home Secretary, before realising that the only policy will work is the policy that you actually started last week, which is to pick up and take back to France, which we're entitled to do under international maritime law? It will help British citizens, it will help the British taxpayers, and it will help the French, and it will reduce the magnet factor.
Well, what I would say to the honourable member is that no one should be making these dangerous journeys, and the criminal gangs are making massive profits from organising these boats. I just don't think they should be able to get away with it, and they are at the moment. We should be taking action against those criminal gangs, and I simply don't accept that it's impossible to go after the criminal gangs to make sure that you take action not just on the gangs themselves, but also on their supply chains, on the routes in which the boats that are taking, on their finances, and that we properly, substantially increase the law enforcement resources. As honourable members will know, we have had cases where journalists have identified the smugglers and those responsible for being involved in some of the smuggler gangs. I think that those smuggler gang members should be facing law enforcement. We have to do this. It's essential that we do. This is about properly standing up for the rule of law, as well as making sure that we do everything we can to prevent these dangerous small boats.
Laura Kirk-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased to see the Home Secretary take her place. My constituents in Aylesbury have two concerns. First, that we re-establish control of our borders. Second, that we remember the need for compassion for vulnerable people fleeing conflict and persecution. On that point, will the Home Secretary commit to ensuring there are resettlement routes for people fleeing desperate and dangerous circumstances? And what will she do to ensure that they are viable? Thank you.
I think the my honourable friend is right to welcome her to her place in this House. That what I think people have always wanted in this country is that combination to have strong border security and to have a proper, fair system. So we do our bit to help those who have fled persecution alongside other countries, but also so the rules are enforced and those who don't have a right to be here should be returned. She will know that, for example, there are a series of different resettlement routes or different forms of support. For example, the Homes for Ukraine scheme which does continue, and also some of the Afghan resettlement schemes. We are concerned about the operation of some of the Afghan schemes, and we are looking at that further to make sure that they are functioning properly.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Home Secretary for her statement. The tragedy of desperate people dying in the Channel is compounded by desperate people dying in the Mediterranean and in the Aegean, as human beings fleeing from all kinds of horrible situations try to seek a place of safety. Is she cooperating with other European countries on a safe route for asylum seekers? Is she prepared to look in a much more humane way at the desperate situation that people face as they're trying to just get out of human rights abuses and wars around the world?
So, the Honourable Member makes a really important point about actually what is happening in the Mediterranean, about the pressures that we have seen, and also the fact, as the Prime Minister said in his statement, that we have seen not just conflict, wars, persecution, but also some of the impact of climate change as well, also making people travel and can sometimes lead to people making dangerous journeys. We should be working to prevent those dangerous journeys in the first place and prevent the need for those dangerous journeys, and that is why the UK government and the Prime Minister announced last week, as part of the European Political Community Summit, that we would invest over £80 million alongside work with other European countries, also as part of the Rome process, both to tackle some of the wider criminal gang networks that still operate in the Mediterranean, but also to make sure that we address some of those sources and the injustices and the serious crises that can lead to people making dangerous journeys in the first place.
Jonathan Brash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I warmly welcome my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, to her place. One of the consequences of the collapse in our asylum system over the last few years has been the increasing and intolerable pressure on local communities, something my constituents in Hartlepool raise with me time and time again. Can I ask the Home Secretary to outline how the steps that she's taking will begin to reduce that pressure on communities like Hartlepool?
Well, can I welcome my honourable friend to his post? I think there is a real challenge from the way in which this sort of chaotic way the asylum system has been run that has led to the last-minute procurement of hotels that have ended up being in a chaotic system, ended up being extremely costly. And so actually everybody loses out from spending billions of pounds on this system, but also local authorities often not having time to work either with communities or with accommodation providers to make sure that things were managed in the right way. I will recognise, I think, the fact that we've got this problem where asylum decisions stopped being taken does mean that there's going to be some challenges now in getting that system working again, and that will mean it will take longer than we had initially anticipated to bring the backlog down. But we are determined to do this. It is the only way to get back to having a functioning system that really everybody should be able to support across the country.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the Home Secretary to her place, wish her well for the future, and thank her very much for the very helpful and confident answers that the Honourable Lady has given. Home Secretary, there is of course a glaring issue regarding border security much closer to home, and that is the Northern Ireland Republic of Ireland border. This border was patrolled by the Republic of Ireland officials, and understandably so, as their right to protect their nation is paramount. However, this also made clear that the Good Friday Agreement does not preclude the need to exert checks on the border. Home Secretary, what discussions have been had with the PSNI and security forces in Northern Ireland to ensure that the open border with the Republic of Ireland does not become a free route to UK immigration?
Well, it's a pleasure to get my first question from the front dispatch box from the Honourable Member. I look forward to very many more. He, of course, raises important issues. Of course, the border issues, of course, between Northern Ireland and Ireland are, of course, different. We have different arrangements, rightly so, that reflect our long shared history. But we also have very close cooperation, and we have close policing cooperation, we have close information sharing, we do have additional information sharing that isn't currently possible under the arrangements we've inherited with other European countries, and I think it's really important that those information sharing arrangements continue, and hopefully we can build on them with other European partners as well.
Pam Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for her statement. I share her astonishment at the scale of the mismanagement of the asylum system by the previous government. My constituency in Colchester has hosted many asylum seekers and indeed refugees over the years. We're a city of sanctuary. Our local authorities have played a full part in supporting that work. But may I ask the Home Secretary, will she confirm that those local authorities will be fully engaged in work going forward to ensure we've got more effective support systems? Thank you.
My honourable friend is right to raise the importance of working closely with local authorities. We are determined to do that. My right honourable friend, the Immigration Minister, already has work in chain looking at how we can better have work and cooperation between the Home Office and the local authorities. And it is also important to recognise that really through very many generations, refugees have come to this country and have contributed to our economy, to society, and been a hugely important part of that. It is partly because it's so important that we have that history, that it's also so crucial to get the whole system functioning again instead of the chaos that we've got at the moment, which just undermines everybody's confidence.
Oliver Ryan.
I thank the Home Secretary for her statement. The people of Burnley, Padiham and Briarfield want to see these crossings stopped and these gangs smashed, and will welcome her tough action today. Because of the previous government's complete failure to control our borders, they spent millions of pounds a week on asylum hotels. What will she do to speed up the processing of people in those hotels and end their use?
We have to do all of these things, Mr. Speaker. We have to, and I welcome the honourable member to Parliament too. We have to have the action on the criminal gangs who are exploiting the situation in the first place, and that does involve much stronger cooperation with other European colleagues, and that must include the new counter-terror powers that will be in the new legislation as part of the King's speech to strengthen the powers against organised immigration crime. But alongside, we've also just got to get the basics right. We've actually got to start taking decisions again, as well as speeding up the asylum decisions and making the system work again.
That completes that statement. Let the front benches change over. Right, we now come to the next statement. I call Ellie Reeves, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, the 19th of July, we saw a CrowdStrike software update on Microsoft systems result in a major global IT outage. It caused significant impacts around the world. Impacts were seen in the transport sector, with flights grounded in Europe, the US, and delays and cancellations here in the UK. On rail, live departure boards were impacted during the morning rush hour, and some media outlets lost the ability to provide live coverage. This caused substantial inconvenience for passengers hoping to travel for the summer holiday getaway on the busiest travel weekend of the year. Airports and airlines across the UK had measures in place to maintain safe operations, support passenger welfare, extend operating hours and deploy additional staff to support late-running operations to keep people moving where possible. As with all incidents, the sector will review their response and implement any learnings. More concerningly, large parts of the local UK healthcare system lost access to test results and appointment information, affecting mostly GP services. Tried and tested NHS contingency plans were enacted, and services are expected to be operating at full capacity in the next few days. Small businesses without dedicated IT support systems were heavily impacted due to disruption to card-only payment systems and ATMs, with many resorting to operate with cash only while firms worked to fix their systems. Many firms were able to get back online quickly, and the remaining are expected to restore operations this week. Officials from the National Cyber Security Centre quickly established the outages were not as the result of either a security incident or malicious cyber activity. The cause was instead identified to be a flawed CrowdStrike software update which caused Windows machines to crash. On Friday morning, CrowdStrike issued guidance on how to solve the problem, giving users a manual fix for each affected device or system. I now believe CrowdStrike is in the process of implementing an automated update which can be applied remotely and should therefore speed up recovery. However, there are still residual impacts from the failed update, and it's important that we continue to monitor the situation and the longer-term impacts to UK sectors and secondary impacts from international disruption. Ever since the incident occurred, the government has worked closely with both Microsoft and CrowdStrike. My Cabinet Office officials have been leading coordination of the government response across all impacted sectors of the economy. This included close monitoring of affected public services to ensure business continuity plans were enacted and services were supported as they came back online. 2 COBRA senior officials meetings were also convened on Friday to coordinate the response, and officials from across Her Majesty's government met over the weekend to continuously monitor the impacts and the recovery process. I'm pleased to say that government services and the online services that government provides were and remain largely unaffected. My colleagues, including the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, the Health Secretary and Transport Secretary, attended briefings with officials throughout, and the Prime Minister was kept informed. The majority of the sectors that were impacted have now mostly recovered. The UK transport system, aviation, rail, road, maritime is running normally. NHS staff worked hard over the course of Friday and the weekend to quickly apply the fixes required, and my colleagues in the Department for Health and Social Care have confirmed that systems are now back online, including for GPs. Their advice is that patients should continue to attend their appointments unless told not to. There may still be some delays, and GPs will need to rebook appointments that could not be made during the IT outage. The public should continue to contact their GPs in the normal way. However, as IT systems are complex, we can expect that minor disruption will continue in some areas while systems continue to recover, but my officials expect these to be resolved in the next couple of days. I'd like to extend my thanks to everyone who has worked so hard to get systems up and running again, and all staff who have worked tirelessly to support individuals impacted by the outage. Following this incident, the Cabinet Office will work with the National Cyber Security Centre and other partners across government to review the lessons learned. The Central Digital and Data Office will work with the NCSC to implement any improvements to the existing response plans to cover both technical resilience features as well as cyber. The COBRA unit will work with departments to support their processes for establishing how the organisations and sectors they represent manage the impacts of the outage and what lessons have been learnt. As soon as this government was elected, we took immediate steps to begin legislating to protect public services and the third-party services they use. Our Cyber Security and Resilience Bill, including in the King's Speech, will strengthen our defences and ensure that more essential digital services than ever before are protected. For example, it will look at expanding the remit of the existing regulation, putting regulators on a stronger footing, and increasing reporting requirements to build a better picture in government of cyber threats. Technology failures can be as disruptive as cyber attacks, and the move to create the Centre for Digital Government within DCIT is aimed at creating a more resilient digital public sector. What this incident shows is how dependent the modern world is on complex and interconnected IT systems, and how essential preparedness for such events is, including business continuity planning. Notwithstanding the immense frustration and inconvenience the outage has caused, I'm pleased to see that effective contingency plans mitigated the potentially very serious impacts this outage could have had. I'm pleased also that there is to be a comprehensive process to identify the lessons from this episode. I hope these will lead to improvements which both help prevent similar incidents and further improve our resilience to system outages and the impacts they can have. And in this spirit, Madam Deputy Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
Oliver Dowden.
Well, may I begin by welcoming the Honourable Lady to her role and thank her for her advanced state of the statement. In that role, I know she will be supported by a dedicated team of civil servants who represent the very best of public service, and I have no doubt that they will serve her as well as they did me. But she will also be aware of the enormous challenges facing this government and governments around the world in relation to cybersecurity. As I warned when I was the responsible minister, threats to public services and critical national infrastructure come from a range of challenges, from hostile state actors to human error and design flaws. Last week, we saw these challenges vividly brought to life. Following the corrupted antivirus update by CrowdStrike on Friday, 8.5 million Microsoft devices globally were rendered unusable. This left airports disrupted, patient records temporarily lost, and GPs unable to access important patient data, creating significant backlogs. This is more than an inconvenience, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to pay tribute to all those working in our public services for the efforts they undertook over the weekend to restore these services, and to the work of dedicated cyber specialists across government, including in the National Cyber Security Centre. In government, we undertook a wide range of measures to enhance the nation's cybersecurity, creating the National Cyber Security Centre, introducing Secure by Design, setting cyber resilience targets, launching GovAssure, and transforming the oversight of governmental cybersecurity. And now I note, as the Honourable Lady said, that the government intends to build on this progress by bringing forward a cyber security and resilience bill. Will the Minister therefore outline the timetable for this bill? And will the government consider mandatory cyber security targets for the UK public sector? And is the government considering obligations to ensure that infrastructure is designed to be resilient against common cause problems such as this one? What steps are being taken to enhance cybersecurity in the devolved administration and in parts of the public sector such as the NHS, which are operationally independent? And specifically in relation to this incident, what assessment has been made of the prevalence of CrowdStrike within critical national infrastructure? And what further reassurances can the government give in relation to the timetable for full recovery of key systems and data? In particular, can the Minister assure employees that this month's payroll will not be adversely affected? Britain's cyber industry is world-leading. Cybersecurity now employs over 60,000 people and brings in nearly £12 billion worth of revenue annually. This transformation was in part due to our £5.3 billion investment, which launched the country's first national cybersecurity strategy. I therefore urge the government, and I see the Chancellor in her place, to continue such investment. Incidents such as CrowdStrike should not deter us from the path of progress. We must embrace digitalisation and the huge improvements in public services that it offers. Indeed, the adoption of artificial intelligence across government is the closest thing we have to a silver bullet for public sector productivity. However, if we are to command public confidence, people must be assured that technology is safe, secure, and reliable. And incidents such as this demonstrate how reliant the government and public services are on large technology companies, and how much responsibility they have for the services that have become critical to people's lives and livelihoods. That's why, in government, I called for us to work more closely with leading technology firms to address these shared challenges. The best solution is partnership. So to that end, what further engagement will the Minister undertake with Microsoft and CrowdStrike and the wider sector to ensure there is no such recurrence. The task for us all is to build on existing progress that has transformed Britain's cyber defences and to enhance protections for British families, businesses, and indeed the very heart of government. And in that mission, the government can rely on the support of these benches.
I thank the Shadow Minister for his contribution and his questions, and particularly I would echo the thanks to all of those involved across the civil service and departments in dealing with the outage last Friday and mitigating the effects of it. I set out in my opening comments that our cybersecurity and resilience bill, which was included in the King's speech, will strengthen our defences and ensure that more digital services are protected, and that is a priority for this government. The bill will look at expanding the remit of existing regulation, putting regulators on a stronger footing, and increasing reporting requirements so that we can build a better picture in government of cyber threats. And we'll also consider the implications of Friday's incident as we develop that legislation. But rest assured that we are working across government in relation to this to ensure resilience. As the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster said in his statement on the COVID Inquiry Module 1 report, he will lead a review to assess our national resilience against the full range of risks that the UK faces, and that includes cyber risks.
Chion Mora.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it is a great pleasure to see the Minister in her place. As she said, the CrowdStrike outage is a reminder of the way in which technology is so integrated into our lives, making all our lives better, but also our dependence on standards of development, deployment and integration of new technology, which are largely not visible to us. I was reassured to hear of the steps that government and businesses have been taken to mitigate the impact, but I fear that small businesses and consumers do not have the same resources. So could the Minister tell us, or does she agree, that you shouldn't have to be able to reboot from a blue screen in order to enjoy the benefits of technology? And will her government move to ensure that consumers are better protected?
Go ahead.
I thank my honourable friend for that contribution, and also want to acknowledge all of the work that she has done in this area. It has been hugely valuable. She makes some really important points about making sure that consumers and small businesses are protected, as well as government departments and bigger business, and I'm sure that will be form part of the lessons learned from this incident, but also feed in to the bill that we'll be introducing.
Daisy Cooper.
Deputy Speaker, it's my first opportunity to welcome ministers to their places, and thank you for advance sight of the statement. I want to focus on the impact on the NHS in particular, and I'm sure my thanks and that of the entire House goes to all NHS staff who've been scrambling to deal with urgent inquiries from distressed patients. I wonder if I might press ministers for assurances on two particular patient groups who suffer from the need for time-critical care. First of all, there are some patients who always require blood test results before they commence urgent treatment or operations, and I wonder if there are any assurances on what attention they've been given by the NHS, both now and in any future scenarios. And secondly, those patients who are at extreme risk of getting an extremely ill from getting COVID. Since the last government scrapped the COVID medicines delivery unit, many vulnerable patients have been struggling to get the COVID antivirals they need from their GPs in time. That situation is made much worse when this kind of disruption happens. I wonder if she could provide any assurances about any attention that NHS England has given to these two patient cohorts, and if not, whether she might be willing to meet with me to discuss what we might do in future.
I thank the honourable member for her question and highlighting the issues facing vulnerable patients. I'm pleased to report that there were no reported impacts to 111 or 999 services and that patients were able to acknowledge emergency care if required. The majority of the impact to GP services were accessing patient records, GP appointments and prescriptions. Patients who couldn't access GP appointments were able to attend urgent care services and GPs were able to issue paper prescriptions, but I will pass on her concerns to my colleagues in the Department of Health because they are incredibly important issues and we need to make sure that vulnerable patients are protected going forward.
Pamela Nash.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome both of you to your very temporary position and also to my honourable friend on the front bench, welcome her to her role. I'd like to ask if there's any further detail that the Minister could share with the House on the particular impact of this outage in Scotland and ask her what conversations her department have had with the Scottish Government in recent days.
Thank you, and I welcome my honourable friend back to the House. It's fantastic to see her in her place, and rightly so. Thank you for the points that you have raised. They are very important and will be taken into account with the lessons learned.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I commend the Minister on her appointment. Does she agree with me that these events demonstrated that we are very far from being in a position to move into a cashless society? And given that the Chancellor is in her place, will she confirm that her government will do everything that it can to support the continued use of cash, which is so important to some of the most vulnerable people in our society?
I thank the honourable member for that point. Cash remains the second most commonly used form of payment in the UK, and we remain committed to ensuring access to cash for individuals and businesses. That's why we have got a commitment to 350 banking hubs so that cash remains available to people. Thank you.
Mark Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to welcome the Minister to place, particularly sat alongside the Chancellor of the Exchequer. I welcome the points that have been made with regard to resilience in public services, but can the Minister assure me that similar efforts are being made to ensure resilience when it comes to IT with regard to defence?
I thank my honourable friend for that contribution, and as I said in answer to a previous question, as soon as this government was elected, we took immediate steps to start legislating to better protect all our public services and the third-party services that they use through the Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill, which will be coming to Parliament.
Jim Shannon.
Deputy Speaker, can I first of all welcome the Minister to her place, and I think and congratulations are due to the Honourable Lady, for I understand the Honourable Lady was in charge of the elections for the Labour Party, so much of the success that there was over there, the Honourable Lady can take some credit for that. It's good to see a reward for the endeavours for hard work. Well done. When it comes to airlines, 171 flights cancelled, of which some of my constituents were stuck in London, couldn't get home to Belfast. When it came to banks, some of my constituents were out in the shops. They were buying their goods and they found their credit cards didn't work because the system was down. When it comes to the health system, and just to give you some effect of that, and the Department of Health in Northern Ireland said that hospital services and around 2/3 of GP surgeries faced problems. There was problems with patients in operating theatres, accessing staff rosters, and the whole system was an absolute chaos. So can I ask the Honourable Lady this question? Yeah, if I can. Does the Minister not agree that the issue has underlined the necessity of ensuring that we are prepared for cyber breakdown, whether that is intentionally done as an attack or unintentionally done? And would the Minister outline perhaps our preparedness for situations such as this, as well as our resilience in moving forward from those type problems for all parts of the United Kingdom, of Great Britain and Northern Ireland? Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for his kind comments. And can I just say that I'm sorry to learn of his constituents who were unable to get flights home or were unable to get GP appointments. I've talked in the statement about resilience going forward and making sure that we expand our cyber resilience, putting regulators on a stronger footing and getting a clear picture of cyber threats and how they can be dealt with. And he raises some very important points about that.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This was an extremely serious incident, which I suspect may well be detectable in the next GDP figures that we see coming out of the ONS. But I had two questions. In her statement, the Honourable Lady said she was pleased to say that government services and the online services that government provides were and remain largely unaffected. Could you just tell us which were in fact affected, or was largely just a euphemism for not affected at all? And secondly, it's quite difficult for members to get a handle on the full impact and spread of this particular contagion. Will she commit to lay in the House some kind of report that details the sectors that were affected, how seriously they were affected, including government systems, and whether and how there will be any resolution in the future? Because obviously we need to report to our constituents that in future these things are less likely to occur.
I set out the impact that the incident had on, for example, GP services, but things like the emergency services remained unaffected as far as we are aware. We are undergoing the lessons learned from the incident, and I'm sure we'll report back on that once that's been completed.
Joshua Reynolds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. GPs in my constituency of Maidenhead were affected on Friday like so many others, and I'd like to thank them for the work they did when, even though patients weren't able to get test results and appointments were missed, they managed to make sure that people received the best care possible. What assurances can the Minister give me about the lessons learnt from Friday so that patients can continue to receive the care they need when they need it?
I welcome the honourable gentleman to the House and place on record my thanks to the GP surgeries in Maidenhead who have done what they can to make sure that disruption for patients were at a minimum. We will be undertaking the lessons learned exercise from this, which I hope will offer some reassurances to his constituents along with the bill that will be going through Parliament.
Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm aware that the Minister is new to her role, so I'm going to ask her to consider things rather than to commit to doing things. Will she please consider continuing with the annual statement to Parliament on civil contingencies and risks that was committed to by the previous government? Will she also consider, when she's looking at the Cyber Security and Resilience Bill, assessing whether there is widespread use of certain software or hardware that could cause mass outages in the event that it is affected, such as in CrowdStrike? I'm not aware that we've seen a kind of analysis of that in previous outputs by the Cabinet Office, and I think it would be incredibly helpful for us to be aware of where those risks are.
I thank the honourable member for those suggestions and very happy to consider the points that she has raised.
I cannot be the only member who thinks how proud Mr and Mrs Reeves must be today. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
King's Speech, motion for an address, adjourned debate on question.
Now, I inform the House that Mr Speaker has selected Amendment H in the name of the Leader of the Opposition. The question is that an humble address be presented to His Majesty as on the order paper. I call Jeremy Hunt to move the amendment.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the amendment in the name of myself and the Leader of the Opposition. It is an important
and rather painful part of our democracy that I am today as Shadow Chancellor responding to the King's speech in exactly the same way the new Chancellor responded to me just a few months ago. So I want to start by congratulating her as well as Mr. and Mrs. Reeves. As the father of 2 girls myself, one of whom has her 10th birthday today, I warmly welcome the smashing of a glass ceiling with Britain's first female Chancellor. As I said on election night, she has led the Labour Party on a difficult journey which has changed it for the better. Her stated commitment to fiscal responsibility, stability and economic growth has been consistent and I'm sure not always easy. Unfortunately for us, her success in holding the line means we face rather a lot of Labour MPs on the government benches, but I wish her well in her new role. I also commend to her the superb Treasury officials she now inherits and want to put on record my gratitude to them for the excellent work they did for me, staying up in the middle of the night ahead of fiscal events, engaging in tense negotiations with spending departments, and occasionally, it has to be said, number 10, bringing me endless flat whites and Pret lunches to keep me going, and most of all, making my family feel welcome in the goldfish bowl that is Downing Street. And it is part of the magic of democracy that those same officials have seamlessly transferred their allegiance from me to her, and I know they will serve her extremely well. Now, in opposition, we won't oppose for its own sake, and there are a number of bills we welcome in the King's speech. She's right to focus on growth, and the improvements on planning build on many reforms introduced by the last government, including the 110 growth measures I introduced in last year's autumn statement. Any boost to house building is also welcome. We delivered 1 million homes in the last Parliament, and she will soon find out that if she's to deliver 1.5 million, she won't be able to duck reforming environmental regulations, a change which Labour blocked in the last Parliament, but which will deliver an extra 100,000 homes. But I caution her not to over-rely on bringing back top-down targets. In the end, we will only build more houses if we change attitudes to new housing, and that is unlikely to happen if unpopular targets are steamrolled through local communities. We'll also look carefully at her proposed budget responsibility bill. We're proud that a Conservative government set up the OBR, and I commend the work of Richard Hughes and his team. We didn't always agree, but that in the end is the point of an independent watchdog. And we all understand the politics of a bill that allows the government to make endless references to the mini-budget. But if she's really committed to fiscal responsibility alongside growth, I hope she will today confirm she will not fiddle with the 5-year debt rule to allow increased debt through the back door. We, and it has to be said, markets will be monitoring the overall level of debt very carefully to make sure that doesn't happen. And I also hope she commissions the OBR to do 10-year forecasts of our long-term growth rate rather than 5 years as at present, in order to bake long-term decision-making into Treasury thinking. I am very happy to give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Grateful to the Shadow Chancellor for giving way. He was talking about fiscal responsibility just now. During the election campaign, he committed to a series of tax cuts. I noticed yesterday on the Laura Kuenssberg show that he said that it wouldn't have been possible for him to proceed with those tax cuts. What is it that has changed, and why did he make that commitment during the election campaign, knowing full well that he couldn't afford to carry it out?
For the Honourable Gentleman for making that intervention, because it allows me to explain why he's completely mistaken in what he is saying. We offered a set of carefully funded tax cuts, fully funded tax cuts, unlike the £38.5 billion of unfunded spending commitments that came from the Labour Party. But we always said they would be brought in over time, over the next Parliament. We did not make a commitment that they would come in immediately, and indeed they would not have, but we would have done so in a responsible way. But when it comes to dubious claims, there are some rather dubious ones the new Chancellor has herself been making that do not withstand scrutiny. Now, she says, for example, that the economy would have been £140 billion bigger if we'd matched the average OECD growth rate. But as she knows, the OECD is a very diverse group of 38 countries, including many with economies very different to our own, such as Turkey or Mexico or Luxembourg. And a much more meaningful comparison is with other similar G7 economies, where, since 2010, we've grown faster than France, faster than Italy, faster than Germany, and faster than Japan. Indeed, the IMF say that thanks to difficult measures taken by the last Conservative government, we will grow faster than any of those 4 countries, not just in the short term, but over the next 6 years. And one of the reasons for that is our record on attracting investment. Since 2010, greenfield foreign direct investment has been higher in the UK than anywhere in the world except the United States and China. In the last year alone, Nissan, JLR, Tata, BMW Mini, Google and Microsoft have all been voting for the UK with their dollars. And that is not least because of cuts in business taxation, such as full expensing, introduced by the last government. If she now looks for backdoor ways to increase business taxation, as many fear she will risk the very attractiveness of the UK to foreign investors, of which she is now the beneficiary. I give way to the Honourable.
To the right honourable gentleman for giving way. This point of investment is very important for my constituents in Stockton North, where we have many companies poised to invest billions of pounds in industrial investment, and they tell me that they prize economic stability above all else. And so I wonder if he might commit now to supporting the Budget Responsibility Bill to give those investors the security that they would need.
Yeah. Well, we are going to study the bill very carefully when it's published. But yes, we are minded to support it, subject to having had a close look at it, because we think it's perfectly sensible. Whether it's completely necessary or not is a different question, but it's perfectly sensible. Now, but I do want to move on to some elements of the King's speech about which we have grave concerns. Bills which a Times editorial this week described as a dose of traditional socialist dogma. Tony Blair came to office having removed the old Clause 4 of the Labour Party constitution because he knew that state-run businesses are rarely successful and usually end up being bailed out by the taxpayer. But with its railway and energy plans, the government last week brought forward more nationalisation than Blair ever did, indeed more than any government in modern times. And I just say to her, if she really cares about fiscal responsibility, she should beware. The reason unions like publicly owned utilities is that it gives them more leverage on pay and more ability to demand bailouts. Unlearning the lessons of history will mean more strikes and bigger bills for the taxpayer. An even bigger concern for business is the impact on jobs of Labour's New Deal for workers. Since 2010, we have seen the creation of almost 4 million jobs, nearly 800 jobs, for every single day Conservative governments were in office. The president of the CBI described the UK as a job creation factory, but like many others, he expressed concerns that the Deputy Prime Minister's new Labour laws could put that at risk. Day one rights sound attractive, but employers fear it will mean a flood of tribunal claims, meaning it's safer not to offer a job at all. That's why the Federation of Small Businesses responded to the King's speech by saying companies were worried about increased costs and risks. In the end, Madam Deputy Speaker, French-style labour laws will lead to French levels of unemployment, which are nearly double our own, indeed close to what they were when the last Labour government was in office. By contrast, Conservatives have nearly halved unemployment over the last 14 years, and it would be a tragedy for working families up and down the country if the new government turned the clock back. Finally, the most dubious claim that we have heard of all is this nonsense about the worst economic inheritance since the Second World War.
which everybody knows is just a pretext for long-planned tax rises. You can see what nonsense this is from a simple comparison to the last time we had a change of party running the government in 2010. Inflation then was 3.4% compared to 2% today. Unemployment was at 8% compared to 4.4% today. Growth was forecast at the time to be one of the slowest in the G7 compared to the fastest today. Instead of an economy where markets and the pounds were facing meltdown, she has inherited one which the ONS said growth was going gangbusters. And since the election, that has been backed up by even more data. May's GDP figures show Britain's growth was double the rate predicted by economists, the fastest in more than 2 years. New figures from S&P show that in February, British businesses were amongst the most optimistic in the world. Top of the league again, according to the ONS. Inflation has remained at the target 2% level. Now, in her BBC interview yesterday, the Chancellor, old habits die hard, glossed over those figures, putting on the most shocked expression she could muster to pretend that public finances are worse than she expected. But the root cause of the pressure on public finances, £400 billion of pandemic support, £94 billion of cost of living support, was never a secret. Indeed, the Labour Party supported those measures and in some cases called for us to go further. Nor were the difficult decisions we had to take to pay for them a secret either. When we had to increase borrowing, increase tax and reduce spending plans in the autumn statement of 2022, Labour did not oppose us. Like all chancellors, she faces fiscal challenges. Welcome to the job. But let me tell her, that job is a whole lot easier because faced with an economic crisis 2 years ago, Conservatives took decisions that her predecessor Labour government ducked completely after the financial crisis. And that's why she has a deficit of 4.4% this year compared to 10.3% left behind for the Conservatives in 2010. And she didn't just compare her inheritance to 2010. She claimed, Madam Deputy Speaker, to have the worst inheritance since the Second World War. Is she really saying that she faces conditions worse than Geoffrey Howe in 1979 with a winter of discontent, stagflation, 83% top rate of tax, and a Labour government that went with a begging bowl to be bailed out by the IMF? And she knows perfectly well herself that claim is nonsense. Otherwise, why, in her first week, would she announce £7.3 billion of spending on her National Wealth Fund without a spending review, without a budget, and without any external validation from the OBR? As Paul Johnson of the IFS says, thanks to the OBR, the nation's books are wide open and fully transparent, so pretending things are worse than expected, his words, really won't wash. And as she establishes her reputation, it is surely unwise to base your big central argument on a claim so patently ridiculous. But we all know exactly why she's doing it. She wants to lay the ground for tax rises that she has been planning all along. And that leads to two major concerns on this side of the House. The first is this. She says her number one mission is growth. But all around the world, evidence suggests countries with higher taxes tend to grow more slowly. Lower taxes, when funded properly, boost growth, as we saw with full expensing and the national insurance cuts last year, both of which the OBR confirmed add to our GDP. But keeping taxes down is hard work. I saw the numbers she's seeing just a few weeks ago, and the official advice was clear. With public sector pay restraint, productivity plans, such as we announced in the budget, and welfare reform, it's perfectly possible to balance the books without tax rises. Not easy, but government never is, but not impossible. Yet all those three things, pay restraint, productivity improvements, and welfare reform, were glaringly omitted from the King's speech. Instead, she's chosen an easier path what Labour Party sources told The Guardian was a doctor's mandate to raise taxes. Now, she's ruled out raising income tax, national insurance and VAT, but she shouldn't think for one second that other tax rises will not impact working people. Capital gains tax destroys the pensions people build up over their lifetime. Business tax rises are passed on to customers, leading to higher bills, and taxes on banks and energy companies lead to fewer companies operating in the UK, a lower tax take, and less money for public services like the NHS. And that, to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the biggest contradiction in this new programme. A government that says it wants the fastest growth in the G7, but plans tax rises in the very same breath that will make that growth harder, if not impossible, to achieve. But even if such an approach is misconceived, it is nonetheless a legitimate choice for a governing party. What is not acceptable is just 18 days after the election to be laying the ground for tax rises after she promised us 50 times in the election campaign she had no plans to raise them. Every Labour government in history has raised taxes and raised spending. If she wanted to do the same, she should have had the courage to make the case for that before the election. Instead, she is softening us up for a colossal U-turn that will lead to lower growth, less money for public services and massive public anger, which is why I commend to the House the amendment in the opposition's name.
The original question was that a humble address be presented to His Majesty, as on the order paper, since when Amendment H has been proposed, as on the order paper. The question is that the amendment be made. The Chancellor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is a pleasure to open today's King's Speech debate on behalf of His Majesty's Government. And I always enjoy debating the Right Honourable Gentleman, though I must say I rather prefer doing it from this side of the chamber. I appreciate his generous words on my appointment and also his tribute to officials who I can confirm are indeed first-rate. It has been over 14 years since a Labour government was in office for a state opening of Parliament. 14 years of chaos, 14 years of economic irresponsibility, 14 years of wasted opportunities. And 14 years since there has been a Labour Chancellor of the Exchequer standing at this dispatch box. Today I pay tribute to my most recent Labour predecessor, the late Lord Darling. He was an outstanding Chancellor, a kind man, and a good friend. Mr. Speaker, it is also the very first time that there has been a female Chancellor of the Exchequer. Now, on my arrival at the Treasury, I learnt that there is some debate about when the first Chancellor was appointed. It was either 800 years ago, when one Ralph de Leicester was given the title of Chancellor of the Exchequer for the first time. Alternatively, 900 years ago, when Henry the Treasurer was referenced in the Domesday Book. Or even 1,000 years ago, when Alfred the Great was in effect the first Master of the Mint. Either way, I'm sure that the whole House would agree on one thing. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have waited far too long for a woman to be Chancellor of the Exchequer. And so I stand here today proud, but also deeply conscious of the responsibility that I now have. A responsibility to women across the country whose work is too often undervalued. And a responsibility to every young woman and girl who should know that there is no ceiling on their ambitions and no limit on their potential. I'll give way.
Thank you very much. 7 Tory men have stood at the dispatch box over the last 14 years, and the result has been an economic crisis, crumbling public services and a cost of living crisis. Can we expect a change of approach from the new Chancellor and female Chancellor of the Exchequer?
Well, one thing is I hope to be in post for a bit longer than some of my predecessors. Madam Deputy Speaker, as tempting as it is, I don't intend to conduct a full sweep of the 1,000 years of economic history from the dispatch box today. I'm sorry. However, we must talk about the last 14 years. I warned that whoever won the general election would inherit the worst set of economic circumstances since the Second World War. and I've seen nothing to change my mind since I arrived at the Treasury. I will update the House on our public spending inheritance before Parliament rises for recess. And I heard what the Shadow Chancellor said from the dispatch box now and on the television yesterday, to claim that I should be grateful for what he has left us. Unbelievable. Because the right honourable gentleman knows the truth, and he's now trying to rewrite history. In doing so, he has reminded the British people why the Conservatives lost the election. They're out of touch, deluded, and unable to defend the indefensible. And in the weeks ahead, it will become clear what his party did. They stored up problems, they failed to take the tough decisions, and then they ran away, leaving it to us, the Labour government, to pick up the pieces and clear up their mess. But today, I want to focus on one thing above all else: economic growth. Since 2010, Conservative Chancellor after Conservative Chancellor, including the right honourable gentleman opposite, have stressed the importance of economic growth. We've had more growth plans than we've had Prime Ministers or Chancellors, and that's quite a lot. But growth requires more than talk. It requires action. Like so much else with the previous administration, when you scratch beneath the surface, the facade crumbles, and all that is left is the evidence of 14 years of failure. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way, and I congratulate her on her appointment. She's making an excellent speech. Friday's ONS report showed that public sector borrowing was 25% higher than forecast. Does she agree with me that this underlines why it was so important to have a fully costed and fully funded manifesto to restore confidence in the public finances, and why it was a surprise that certain other parties did not follow the same route?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and he speaks powerfully, and I want to pay tribute to the work that he did in the last Parliament, particularly around education and skills. I think it's a really important point, this, because the manifesto that we stood on, for me, the most important pages were the 3 grey pages at the back of the manifesto that set out all of our spending commitments and how they are paid for. And that was important because to earn the trust of the electorate, you have to be really clear of where the money's going to come from and what you're going to use it for. And that's what we did in our manifesto, and that's what we will do in government. Now, the right honourable gentleman, the Shadow Chancellor, made some points about GDP and comparing it with other countries. But since 2010, UK GDP per capita, and that's the most important measure because that is how people feel, the money that they have. It's grown slower than the G7 average, it's grown slower than the EU average, and it's grown slower than the OECD average. Treasury analysis that I requested when I became Chancellor shows that had the UK economy grown at the average OECD rate these last 14 years, our economy would be over £140 billion bigger today. This could have brought in an additional £58 billion of tax revenues in the last year alone, money that could have been used for our schools, our hospitals and other vital public services. Madam Deputy Speaker, growth is about more than just lines on a chart, though. It's about the money in people's pockets. And Treasury analysis shows that achieving the rate of growth of similar economies would have been worth more than £5,000 for every household in Britain. Now, the Shadow Chancellor stands up today and once again claims that he's bequeathed a great legacy. I mean, seriously, it's the first Parliament on record where living standards were lower at the end of the Parliament than they were at the start. The highest level of debt since the 1960s. The highest tax burden in 70 years. Mortgages through the roof. The economy only just recovering after last year's recession. Economic inactivity numbers last week showing a further rise. And borrowing numbers last week showing over £3 billion more borrowing than the OBR expected. That is their legacy. Madam Deputy Speaker, if that is such a good inheritance, I would hate to see what a bad one looks like. And I think deep down the Shadow Chancellor knows this. In fact, he does know it. Yesterday, the Shadow Chancellor admitted what we all know, that the manifesto that he campaigned on was undeliverable. that the money for the tax cuts that he promised simply was not there. And if the Shadow Chancellor wants to show the country that his party has listened, that they have learned from their mistakes, the Shadow Chancellor would have used his speech this afternoon to apologise, but he didn't. And it tells you everything you need to know about this Conservative Party. Party first, country second. Political self-interest ahead of the national interest. Irresponsibility before the public good. So let me say this to the Conservative Party. We will not stop holding you responsible for the damage that you have done to our economy and to our country. Never again will we allow them to crash our economy. They failed this country. They shied away from tough choices, and we won't repeat their mistakes. So it falls on us, this new Labour government, to fix the foundations so we can rebuild Britain and make every part of our country better off. We will govern through actions, not words, and we have already begun to do just that, because there is no time to waste. Less than 72 hours after I was appointed as Chancellor, I put growth at the very heart of our work. Working alongside my right honourable friend, the Deputy Prime Minister, I set out reforms to our planning system. Reforms that the party opposite didn't deliver in 14 years. Restoring mandatory targets to build the homes that we desperately need. Ending the absurd ban on onshore wind to deliver homegrown, cheaper energy. And recovering planning appeals for key projects that have been sitting on the desks of government ministers in the last Parliament for far too long. Tough decisions that the Conservative Party already opposes. Why was this my first act as Chancellor? Because getting our economy growing is urgent. And this King's speech shows that we are getting to work. I'll happily give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful. On the matter of mandatory housing targets, having been a constituency MP for 23 years and seen this tried a number of different ways, could I humbly offer to her in all sincerity, there is such a thing as good development, but it only works if it's something that you do with people and not to people. And this Stalinist approach won't work.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll be compared to a lot of things, but never compared to Joseph Stalin. Now, our approach is a brownfield-first approach, and we will reintroduce those mandatory targets, but of course it's up to local authorities and local communities to decide where the housing should be built. But the answer can't always be no, because if the answer is always no, we'll continue as we are, with home ownership declining and mortgages and rents going through the roof. And on this side of the House, we are not willing to tolerate this. Now, this King's speech shows that we are getting to work. As my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, set out, our programme for government will be founded on principles of security, fairness and opportunity. And our number one mission is to secure sustained economic growth in our great country through a new partnership between government, business and working people, which prioritises wealth creation for all of our communities. We will fix the foundations of our economy so we can rebuild Britain and make every part of our country better off. There are a number of important pieces of legislation in the King's speech that will help us to grow the economy. Today I want to focus on three in particular. The Budget Responsibility Bill to restore economic stability, the National Wealth Fund Bill to drive investment, and the Pension Scheme Bill to reform our economy. Because they speak not just to our programme for government, but also to trust in politics. They show that we will govern as we campaigned, and we will meet our promises to the British people. Madam Deputy Speaker, in the election campaign, I said that the first step that we would take would be to restore economic stability, because stability is the precondition to a healthy and growing economy. It is how we keep taxes, inflation and mortgages as low as possible. After years of irresponsibility, we are putting our economy on firm ground once again. We introduced the new Budget Responsibility Bill on Thursday to deliver on our manifesto commitment to introduce a fiscal lock so that I can keep an iron grip on our country's finances. I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm extremely grateful to the Chancellor. Thanks very much indeed. She and I sat on the Treasury Select Committee together many years ago, and she will know from our time together that economics is as much art as it is science. So given that she's effectively giving a veto over economic policy to the OBR through this bill, she must recognise that we need to understand what the people in the OBR believe, what their theories of economics are, what principles they attach themselves to. So what further scrutiny will be available for this House, for the chair of the OBR and the people who are doing the forecast, given that effectively they will be co-chancellor with her during the next few years?
Well, look, the Treasury Select Committee, as the Right Honourable Gentleman knows, can call in the Chair and other members of the Office of Budget Responsibility. But the comments from the Right Honourable Gentleman show exactly why we need this bill, so that never again can we have a repeat of the mini-budget. Now, this bill will require every announcement which makes significant and permanent changes to tax and spending to be subject to an independent assessment by the Office of Budget Responsibility. Why? Because unfunded, reckless commitments don't just threaten our public finances, they threaten people's incomes and they threaten people's mortgages. We saw that in the wake of the mini-budget presided over by the former member for South West Norfolk. Now, I understand that she's taken umbrage in recent days at the idea that this episode was disastrous. Well, if any member on the opposition benches would like to dispute that fact today, I'd be more than happy to give way. They cheered at the time, Madam Deputy Speaker, but they're not cheering it now, and I don't imagine they put that on their leaflets. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, they should be ashamed. They should be ashamed of what they did, because people up and down the country are still paying the price for the chaos that they caused. But we say never again. And the Budget Responsibility Bill will enshrine that commitment in law.
Will my right honourable friend give way?
I will give way, yes.
Well, those from the party opposite during the pandemic were awarded, their friends and family were awarded contracts for work that were never fulfilled. And my constituents in York Outer would love to know how can we get their money back, perhaps through the role of the COVID Corruption Commissioner.
Well, I enjoyed campaigning for my honourable friend in York Outer, and it's great to see him in his place today. Madam Deputy Speaker, stability means a tough set of fiscal rules, but it also means spending public money wisely, as my honourable friend says. The past government hiked taxes while allowing waste and inefficiency to spiral out of control. Nowhere was this more evident than during the pandemic, especially when it came to PPE, because the former Prime Minister, when he was Chancellor, signed cheque after cheque after cheque for billions of pounds worth of contracts that did not deliver for the NHS when it needed it. And that is simply unacceptable. So today I can announce that I am beginning the process to appoint a COVID Corruption Commissioner to get back what is owed to the British people. Because that money today in the hands of fraudsters belongs in our public services, and we want that money back. The Commissioner will report to me, working with the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, and their report will be presented to Parliament for all members to see. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will not tolerate waste. I will treat taxpayers' money with respect, and I will return stability to our public finances. Madam Deputy Speaker, the second bill I want to speak to today is the National Wealth Fund Bill. We know that economic stability is vital for investors and for business. The small business looking to grow, the global business looking to expand in the UK, the entrepreneur looking to take their first steps. And to support them, stability must sit alongside investment. I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful to the Chancellor for giving way, and I wonder, in relation to the effective use of public funds, whether she's aware not only of the alleged corruption of the way in which COVID aid was distributed, but if you look at the way that, in fact, a large number of tax loopholes exist in this economy. For example, in Cornwall, over £500 million of taxpayers' money was handed out to holiday homeowners, not only through COVID aid, but also through the Small Business Rate Relief Scheme, and indeed other tax loopholes, whilst at the same time only a third of that amount has gone into social housing for first-time users. So will the Chancellor look indeed at the whole issue of parity of the way in which public funds are used in order to support people who need housing?
Well, I would like to welcome the honourable member back to this place. I enjoyed sparring with him in my early days in Parliament, and it's great to see him back in the House. And the honourable gentleman is absolutely right that we need to get value for money for all tax incentives, and I will make sure that the Treasury, but also the Department, the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government looks at the changes that he suggests. The last government's record on investment was dismal. We now sit behind every single member of the G7 when it comes to business investment as a share of GDP. Now, that isn't an abstract economic problem. Weak investment holds back productivity and it hurts living standards. It leaves households poorer and it leaves wages lower. So this King's speech deals directly with the need to unlock private investment through a new National Wealth Fund bill. This will be supported by an injection of capital, part funded by an increase to the windfall tax on oil and gas giants. It will make transformative investments in industries of the future, like carbon capture and storage and green hydrogen. It will mobilise billions of pounds worth of additional private sector investment in our industrial heartlands and coastal communities, while generating a return for taxpayers. The National Wealth Fund will work with local partners, including mayors, as well as the devolved administrations in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, to develop an investment offer which meets the needs of all of our nations and regions. It will simplify a complex landscape of support for businesses today, aligning key institutions like the UK Infrastructure Bank and the British Business Bank under one banner of the National Wealth Fund.
Would my right honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
I'm very grateful to her, and I heartily applaud what she's saying about the renewed windfall tax. Will she also look at the fact that in this country we actually have the lowest basic rate of tax at 38%, I believe, on oil and gas companies anywhere in the world. The average is 74%. In this country, it has been 38%. Will she look at that?
Well, we committed in our manifesto, as the honourable gentleman knows, to have a 3 percentage point uplift from the current energy profits levy. And we will use that to fund the National Wealth Fund. The National Wealth Fund will power jobs and prosperity in all parts of our country. And this work is already well underway. I welcomed the report of the National Wealth Fund Task Force in my first week in office. And I want to thank the former Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, and the whole task force for their outstanding work. This bill will put the National Wealth Fund onto a statutory footing with clear objectives, crowding in private investment to create wealth right across Britain.
Will the Chancellor give way?
I will give way to my honourable friend.
I thank the Chancellor for giving way. Under the Conservatives, businesses and working people were held back by a complete and abject failure to build the new homes that my constituents in Ealing Southall were crying out for, the laboratory spaces that will provide the jobs of the future, and the national infrastructure needed for businesses and working people to prosper. Will she assure this House that under her chancellorship we will finally get Britain building again?
Yeah. I welcome the election of my honourable friend in Ealing Southall, and I think her constituents in this whole House can see what a strong advocate will be for her local community. My honourable friend is absolutely right. We've got to get Britain building again. We've got to build the homes, the transport infrastructure, the energy infrastructure and the digital infrastructure that our country desperately needs. I'm very happy to take an intervention.
The Chancellor for giving way, but for giving me a chance to be intervened. But I can also ask the Chancellor this point. And when it comes to rebuilding and the house building programme that the Right Honourable Lady has suggested should happen, in the papers today it suggests that people who are on a £70,000 mortgage, £70,000 wage can't get a mortgage. In Northern Ireland, those on a smaller wage can't get a mortgage either. So can I ask the Chancellor this direct and hopefully positive question with a positive answer? Is it possible that the issue of mortgages and access to mortgages for those who want to have accommodation rather than rental accommodation, that can happen? And what can the Chancellor do to make sure that everyone in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland can benefit, as the Honourable Lady has quite clearly said they will? Thank you.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that intervention. One of the biggest challenges people have in getting a mortgage is building up the deposit. And that's why we've committed to a mortgage guarantee scheme to help those people who can't rely on the bank of mum and dad to be able to get on the housing ladder. That's a really important commitment, as well as that commitment to build the homes. Because frankly, unless you build more homes, you're going to find that home ownership continues to go backwards, as it did in the last few years. Alongside the stability and investment in our economy must come reform. Because to deliver economic growth requires tough choices. It means taking on vested interests and confronting issues that politicians have too often avoided. The last government refused to engage with these choices, and they refused to level with the British people about what was required. This government will be different. We've demonstrated that already with a series of reforms to our planning system, and we are bringing forward further legislation in the King's Speech to get Britain building. Today, I want to focus on another area of our economy where reform is vital: our pension schemes. People across our country work hard to save for the future. They want a better, more secure retirement with the most generous pension possible. At the same time, British businesses with high growth potential need capital to support their expansion. Pension funds are at the heart of this. There will soon be over £800 billion of assets in defined contribution pension schemes. But for too long, these assets have not been targeted towards UK markets. That has impacted British savers and it has impacted British business. The last government said that this was a problem too, and I welcome that acknowledgement. But they never introduced the legislation needed to make the change. We believe in deeds, not words, so we will strengthen investment from private pension providers by bringing forward the Pension Schemes Bill in the King's Speech. It will boost pension pots by over £11,000 through a new and improved value for money framework. And through an investment shift in DC schemes, just a 1% shift in asset allocation could deliver £8 billion of new productive investment into the UK economy. To ensure that the bill is as strong as possible, I am today launching a pensions investment review, led by the first ever joint Commons Minister appointed between the Treasury and the Department for Work and Pensions, the Honourable Member for Wickham, the Pensions Minister. This will include a review of the local government pension scheme, the 7th largest pension fund in the world, to ensure it is getting the best value from the savings of nearly 7 million public sector workers, the majority of whom are women and the majority of whom are low paid. They deserve a pension that is working for them. Together, these reforms will kickstart economic growth by unlocking investment which has been tied up for too long. I've already given way to the honourable gentleman. Madam Deputy Speaker, I know...
Could I just urge the House to think about interventions, because there is a very long list of members who want to speak and lots of people who want to make their maiden speech, and it would be great if you could all get in.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, you'll be pleased to know that I won't apprise the House of every bill which supports economic growth in the King's Speech, but needless to say, there are many more. From the English Devolution Bill to transfer power back into the hands of local communities, to the Employment Rights Bill to make work pay, and the Great British Energy Bill to take back control of our country's energy and create new jobs across the United Kingdom. Growing our economy flows through almost every word of this address. Madam Deputy Speaker, the British people put their trust in us on the 4th of July to fix the foundations of our economy, to rebuild Britain, and to make every part of our great country better off. I do not take that trust for granted. We will not let people down, and I am ready to deliver the change that we need. I know it will take time. I know it will require hard work, but we are already getting on with the job. By ending a reckless, chaotic approach to economic management, by putting politics back in the service of working people, and by making economic growth our fundamental mission. Madam Deputy Speaker, I commend the address to the House.
Sarah Olney, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair, and it's a real pleasure to be contributing to this debate on behalf of the Liberal Democrats, not just because I'm speaking on behalf of so many more of them than I used to, but also because it gives me an opportunity to welcome the Chancellor of the Exchequer to her place, to express my personal congratulations on becoming the first woman in the UK's history to hold the position. I'm personally delighted. I've spent many years working in banking and finance. I know how male-dominated those industries still are.
and I wish the Honourable Lady well in her new role and look forward to working with her over the coming Parliament. The Liberal Democrats will be vigorous in scrutinising her plans, but we will always work in the national interest, and I can assure her of the support of these benches on all those matters on which we can agree. And I'm sure that one of the things on which we can certainly agree is that the Honourable Lady and her colleagues have received a dismal inheritance from the departing Conservative administration. The numbers reveal a dispiriting picture of low growth, high interest rates and a record fall in living standards, delivered by an out-of-touch and incompetent Conservative Party that took people for granted for years. Our constituents see this situation reflected in the increases in their mortgage payments, the hike in their energy bills, the prices they pay at the tills for their weekly shop. They see it in public services that are in a state of crisis and an NHS that is failing to deliver the care they need. Liberal Democrats welcome the sense of seriousness with which this King's Speech focuses on stability, reinvesting in our crippled public services and growing the economy. And while we welcome measures such as the introduction of an Industrial Strategy Council to coordinate policy on economic growth, the immediate and pressing problems that our constituents are facing in their everyday lives cannot just be addressed by centralised top-down institutions run from Whitehall. Our economy needs to grow from the bottom up, bringing prosperity to every community, taking away the barriers to entry for small businesses and enabling individuals all across the country to make the most of their skills and talents. And Liberal Democrats wants to see urgent measures introduced which will give immediate support to families and small businesses. While we were out on the doorsteps for the general election campaign, myself and my 71 colleagues heard clearly the message from our constituents that their biggest priority was fixing the NHS. We are here because we promised to fight hard for a better NHS for our constituents and for communities across the country, and that is why we are calling for the Chancellor to immediately draw up a budget for health and social care. Because you can't deliver economic growth without fixing the crisis in our NHS and in social care. NHS waiting lists are at an all-time high. It can take weeks to see a GP, and it is now almost impossible to see an NHS dentist. Everyone deserves access to the care they need, when they need it and where they need it. A successful health and social care system is fundamental to a fair society and our country's prosperity. And the failures of the Conservative administration led to a dramatic increase in the number of people experiencing long-term sickness conditions, and the Liberal Democrats will continue to push for public service investment to help reduce NHS waiting lists to get people back to work.
My honourable friend give way.
With pleasure.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Does she agree with me that reforming social care is one of the most urgent priorities of this government? The Cornwall Hospital Trust recently announced that £26 million a year is spent on patients who are medically well but are unable to be discharged due to a lack of social care packages.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. He's absolutely right, of course, and it's wonderful to see him in his place, and the people of North Cornwall will be well served by his championing of social care in particular, and that is why it was front and centre of the Liberal Democrat manifesto in the general election. The most direct way to alleviate poverty is to increase the money paid to the poorest households. We know that those of our fellow citizens currently living in the severest poverty are likely to be families with small children. Growing up in poverty affects children's educational chances and is likely to impact their physical and mental health, holding them back from achieving their true potential. Taking immediate steps to tackle child poverty should therefore be a priority. We believe that removing the two-child cap is the most cost-effective way of immediately lifting 500,000 children out of poverty, while helping to make costs more manageable for parents. This would have a direct benefit to families struggling with a cost-of-living crisis. Not only do we have a moral obligation to change this unnecessary policy, but it's the most cost-effective way of alleviating poverty with a broad range of economic advantages, including supporting more parents back into the workforce. So I urge the Chancellor of the Exchequer to remove the two-child limit on social security payments in her first budget to ensure that all families who need it receive immediate reassurance and support. But families of all sizes are suffering under the cost of living crisis and desperately need help. Our schools are increasingly having to battle the effects of poverty to ensure that children are able to attend school and have the best possible chance of reaching their potential. And too many children are distracted from their lessons because they haven't had enough to eat. The Liberal Democrats set out plans in their manifesto for free school meals for all children living in poverty, with an ambition to extend them to all children once public finances allow. The Liberal Democrats are calling on the government to consider funding free school meals as a priority to alleviate the pressure on the finances of families who are struggling the most, and it will contribute to positive educational outcomes that will benefit us all in the future. The Liberal Democrats welcome many of the measures in the King's speech that aim to boost economic growth, and we support the government's objectives to make this a priority. We welcome moves to boost stability and to provide strategic leadership via an Industrial Strategy Council and to increase investment through pension reform. However, our small businesses and our local high streets need immediate support, and the government needs to do more to ensure that economic growth can reach every part of the United Kingdom and that small businesses and entrepreneurs can quickly rediscover the confidence that they need to invest after years of Conservative chaos and mismanagement. Liberal Democrats want to see more direct support which will impact local community businesses. We believe we need swift action specifically to tackle high energy costs, and we continue to call for business rate reform. A new Parliament represents a real opportunity to begin to properly rebuild our trading relationships with Europe. And in speaking with many small business owners, I understand the pressures and limitations that current trade deals with Europe pose to businesses. We must tackle the arduous legislation surrounding importing and exporting goods, which significantly limits the opportunities for small businesses to grow. The Liberal Democrats have a comprehensive plan to rebuild trust and cooperation with Europe, and we understand this to be a crucial aspect of the support which businesses urgently need. We welcome the government's acknowledgement of the need to reform the apprenticeship levy. However, we'd like to see them go further and replace the current scheme with a broader and more flexible skills and training levy. And we hope the government will join us in encouraging the take-up of apprenticeships, particularly for young people, in supporting our calls to guarantee they are paid at least the national minimum wage by scrapping the lower apprentice rate. We understand the broad economic benefits of supporting the development of skilled workers and are optimistic of the advantages that this could bring to business. The recent years of chaos and irresponsible Conservative administration has left a substantial challenge for the new government to tackle. We do not underestimate the work which lies ahead of us, getting the economy back up and running, nurturing an environment which will allow businesses to thrive, and restoring the public services which provide care for people when they need it. My Liberal Democrat colleagues and I will hold the new government to account to ensure that they deliver on the promises which were outlined by His Majesty on Wednesday as we work to rectify the damage done by the Conservatives, rebuild our economy by supporting individual communities, small businesses and urgently investing in health and social care. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
I think it is